A speck of light appeared within the darkness, like the rising sun tearing through the night. The black hole was torn apart by this ray of light as a green magic shield appeared around the griffin's body. At the same time, a streak of silvery white light erupted from the tip of the mag's claymore as he swept it through the air. Countless eyeballs exploded upon making contact with the magic shield, and boundless spatial power swept forth from within the black hole, but the magic shield merely tremored slightly in response. In the distant sky, a ray of green light shot forth, landing directly onto the magic shield, bolstering it by injecting it with energy. The black hole was sliced apart, and the eye beast let loose a roar of shock and horror before it was also split down the middle by Mag's claymore. The spatial demon patriarch's expression changed drastically as he hurriedly pressed the two discs in his hands downward. An inky black spatial rift appeared behind him, and he immediately stepped backward into it. The eye beast had been completely sliced in half, and the two halves of its massive body rained down from above along with fragments of internal organs. The two golden discs that were stacked on top of one another were rotating furiously, producing a sound akin to that of thunderclaps, and looked as if they were about to explode at any moment. Mag's claymore struck the discs, and pierced directly through their center. A thunderous explosion erupted as the two golden discs shattered, disintegrating into countless shards that flew in all directions. The claymore continued onward, striking the spatial demon patriarch just as the spatial rift was about to close. A jet of green blood splattered through the air amid a howl of agony from within the spatial rift. The space before Mag warped and twisted, following which the spatial demon patriarch appeared several hundred meters away. His face was deathly pale, and he had one hand clasped over his chest. "Alex, I'm going to kill you next time to quench my thirst for your blood." The spatial demon patriarch glowered at Mag with a deranged expression of rage and horror. An orange bead was crushed in his hand, and the space around him instantly collapsed to form a black hole. He then immediately disappeared, and countless droplets of rain also surged into the black hole due to the enormous suction force emanating from within. As expected, my man really is the best. Irina's eyes were twinkling like stars as she stared at Mag. She loved Alex the most during the moments when he withdrew his sword after defeating his opponents. Many beings had suffered a loss to Alex's mighty claymore, and all of them were powerhouses on the Norland continent. Alex won. The black-robed men looked with wide eyes as they sat atop their unicorn steeds. All of them had astonishment etched on their faces, and they were almost unable to believe what they were witnessing. The terrifying eye beast and the almighty spatial demon patriarch formed an almost invincible duo, but they had been crushed by Mag. "The invincible war god is back," one of the black-robed men croaked through a dry throat. A series of legends surrounding Alex began to surface in their memories. This was a legendary man who could even slay giant dragons, and was widely renowned as the most powerful knight in history. 3 years ago, he was reported to have been killed. During these 3 years, they had been searching for him tirelessly, wanting to kill him in order to establish resounding reputation for themselves. Only in that instant did they realize how naive they had been. The so-called cripple that was Alex had reappeared. He had slain 3 10th-tier powerful beings, killed the fearsome eye beast, and forced the spatial demon patriarch into retreat. The legend was back, and your daddy would always be your daddy. From this day forth, all of the organizations searching for Alex would most likely disband. Who would dare to continue hunting for Alex when he was at the height of his powers? Amid the rain of blood falling from the sky, the man sitting atop the purple-striped griffin was the epitome of invincibility. Mag inspected the countdown timer, which had already ticked down to a minute, and he heaved an internal sigh of relief. It was a pity that he was unable to kill that midget, but he had saved Irina, and it was time for him to retreat. The green magic shield kept all of the rain at bay while sending wisps of green light surging into Irina's body. In the distant sky, there was a ray of green light that was still relentlessly pouring energy into the magic shield. As the green light was injected into her body, color began to gradually return to Irina's pale features, but she still showed no intention of letting go of Mag's waist. "There's a cat over there." Mag was just about to urge Ozzy to depart from this place when Irina suddenly pointed toward a certain corner, where a patch of leaves was emanating faint green light. It was acting as an umbrella, shielding the rain from the shivering cat, which was meowing in Irina's direction. A dozen or so black-robed figures riding atop unicorn steeds were nervously awaiting the griffin that was flying toward them. Mag hesitated momentarily before changing direction, spurring his griffin directly downward. Disperse! All of the black-robed figures wore expressions of shock and horror as they fled in different directions. After witnessing Mag's unfathomably fearsome power with their own eyes, they were completely petrified and could only flee to try and save their own lives. All of the magic casters among them instantly conjured up magic shields. They knew that those magic shields wouldn't keep them safe, but they were hoping that those shields would keep them alive for just a split second longer. Despair instantly began to spread through the group of black-robed figures. Many of them were beginning to regret ever harboring the intention to find and kill Alex. They had finally found him, but they were the ones who were going to be killed. As the griffin descended, their unicorn steeds keeled over from fear, sprawling to the ground as if they were welcoming their king. The despair in the hearts of the black-robed figures only intensified upon seeing this. They couldn't even try to escape now, and could only await their inevitable deaths. However, just as the black-robed figures were anticipating a one-sided slaughter, the purple-striped griffin suddenly stopped. Irina bent over and gently picked up the black cat within the rubble. The black cat meowed as it licked Irina's fingers before curling up in her arms. The purple-striped griffin then spread its wings and rose into the air. The gale force winds swept up by the griffin's powerful wings almost swept the black-robed figures off their feet. All of them looked up at the griffin and its mighty rider with a mixture of relief and bitterness in their hearts. It was quite clear that in Alex's eyes, their blood wasn't even worthy of staining his blade. "Alex, leave Irina behind." Right at this moment, Josh also arrived on the 5th Street atop his griffin. He was glowering at Mag with a twisted expression of fury, and golden light shimmered from the tip of his wand, which was pointed straight at Alex. "Seeing as you're asking for death, I'll grant you that wish." Mag's expression also cooled as he looked at Josh. He spurred on his purple-striped griffin to accelerate further as he slashed his claymore through the air. The purple-striped griffin abruptly accelerated as Mag slashed with his black claymore through the air. Its sharp blade sliced through countless droplets of rain, bearing down on Josh with devastating force. Josh stared at the incoming claymore, and his face completely paled. A bone-chilling sensation had enshrouded his entire body, and the powerful killing intent hanging in the air had him completely petrified. Even though his assailant was wearing a black mask, he knew that it was Alex. Indeed, Mag had no intention of holding back this time. 3 10th tier powerful being and an eye beast had just been slain, while the spatial demon patriarch had fled with severe injuries. The smell of blood and gore permeating through the air was downright nauseating, but it also made him more conscious and alert. This was a man who had slain countless enemies for the empire on its borders, yet he was now going to kill the prince of the very empire he had once served. Golden light was still converging toward the tip of Josh's wand. The more powerful the spell, the longer it would take to manifest. He knew that his spell wouldn't be ready before Alex's claymore struck him. This realization filled him with despair. Josh experienced despair for the first time in his life. He suddenly regretted coming here. He regretted letting his jealousy get the better of him, thereby plunging him to his death. With the things that he'd done in the past, he knew that there was no way Alex would spare him. At such close quarters, who was going to be able to save him? At the very least, this was definitely a task beyond the capabilities of the elderly magic caster who had accompanied him here. A series of magic shields rose up all around him. These were all protective instruments given to him by magic casters from the Magus Tower. There were even some that had been made by Richard himself, and were said to be capable of keeping even 10th tier attacks at bay for a short time. Even so, Josh didn't feel safe at all. He was being attacked by Alex, a man who stood beyond the realm of reason. "Your Highness!" The elderly magic caster's expression also changed drastically as he flew toward Josh atop his giant falcon steed. He pointed his wand at Mag and red light erupted as a flaming bird flew forth. The bird spread its wings and instantly flew past, heading directly toward the purple-striped griffin. Is he going to kill Josh? A hint of a smile appeared on Irina's face as she rested her head against Mag's back. In the past, he would have most likely at least hesitated slightly in this situation. Now, he seemed to be more reckless and willful. It'd be a fantastic bonus if I can kill him here, Mag thought to himself as his countdown timer dwindled down to 10 seconds. It could be said that Josh was the mastermind behind everything, and he was firmly at the top of Mag's hit list. He didn't know when he was actually going to recover to the height of Alex's powers, and it was quite clear that opportunities to temporarily recover this power would be exceedingly rare. If he could take advantage of this opportunity to kill Josh, then that would be a brilliant outcome for him. The sharp blade of the claymore sliced through the flaming bird, vanquishing it in an instant. Josh was already right before him with over 10 magic shields around his body, and Mag was glowering at him with eyes that belonged to a god of slaughter. Josh's griffin steed also seemed to have been struck by horror and despair, and it desperately tried to turn its trembling body around, almost throwing off Josh in the process. 5, 4, 3, the system's mechanical voice sounded within Mag's mind, informing him of how many seconds remained on the countdown timer. Mag's eyes narrowed, and his sword-wielding hand had never been so firm and stable before. He was drawing upon everything he had, and this sword strike was going to be the most powerful attack he had ever unleashed. Right at this moment, a black shadow emerged from a dark alley. A dangerous light immediately appeared in Mag's eyes. His claymore sliced through the magic shields as if they were nothing but frail balloons. Even the magic shields crafted by Richard himself couldn't slow down Mag's claymore in the slightest. In the face of that unstoppable black claymore, a look of despair appeared in Josh's eyes. He suddenly thought back to when he first met Irina in the Magus Tower many years ago. It was love at first sight for him, and he decided, there and then, that she was going to be his future wife. But now, she was sitting behind Mag with her arms wound tightly around his waist in an intimate manner. No. The elderly magic caster let loose a heartbroken roar. His second spell wasn't going to be prepared in time. Your Highness! The black-robed figures down below were also looking on with shock and horror in their eyes. If Josh were to die here, all of them would most likely follow in his footsteps soon after. The black shadow that was lurking in the darkness raised a hand, and a black vortex began to appear before him. Josh closed his eyes. His biggest regret before his death was that he was too stubborn and decided to let Alex live 3 years ago. The expressions of horror on the faces of the elderly magic caster and the black-robed figures congealed in that instant. Alex's sword could be indirectly taking their lives along with Josh's. There was no one in this world who could stop Alex at such close quarters. The tip of the claymore pierced through the final magic shield, and then sliced apart Josh's wand. However, it suddenly changed direction when it was less than an inch from Josh's neck. Even so, it still inflicted a rather deep gash in his neck. The claymore then traveled downward instead, instantly slaying Josh's griffin steed. Josh let loose a cry of surprise as he abruptly plummeted from the sky with his hands clasped around his neck. He landed on a pile of putrid flesh and internal organs before looking up at Mag with a confused expression in his eyes. You spared me 3 years ago, so I'm returning the favor now. However, I'll be back for your life. Mag withdrew his claymore as he looked down at Josh with a cold expression. He glanced at the black shadow, which had retreated back into the darkness, and his griffin steed spread its wings before flying away. Josh looked on at the griffin's departing figure, and his face was deathly pale. He felt as if his entire body had been plunged into a glacial pit. Even though he wasn't dead, Alex had promised to return for his life. For some reason, the crushing despair evoked within him by this threat was even more painful than death itself. Are you all right, Your Highness? The elderly magic caster and the black-robed figures hurriedly circled around. All of the magic casters proficient in healing magic immediately began to administer treatment to Josh, and all of them wore elated and relieved expressions on their faces. If anything were to happen to Josh, the only thing that awaited them would be certain death. At this moment, a flash of light appeared on the 5th Street, and a pair of elderly men emerged from within a teleportation formation. The purple-striped griffin departed from the 5th Street in the blink of an eye, flying toward the western region of the city like a speeding arrow. Mag's body suddenly sagged as his claymore slipped out of his grasp and fell onto the griffin's back. He was suddenly struck by a sense of crushing feebleness, and he fell backward involuntarily, landing in a warm and soft embrace. Within the starry cave, the star that was about to be snuffed out not long ago gradually began to brighten again. Even though it wasn't as dazzling as it had once been, it was slowly recovering, displaying a lot of resilience. The tense expression on Helena's face gradually eased upon seeing this. In contrast, Hetty was looking up at the star from down below, and the resentment in her eyes was only growing more pronounced. All of the elves in the wind forest were looking up toward the west as that was the direction that the rays of green light emanating from the Tree of Life were heading in. Also in that direction was the Roth Empire, which was where Princess Irina was currently situated. No one knew what had happened, but the Tree of Life's abnormal display seemed to be indicating that something was wrong. The Elven Queen, who was standing atop the tallest tree in the wind forest, heaved a sigh of relief. However, her eyes were still filled with concern as she cast her gaze toward the northwest, and she murmured to herself, "What happened, Irina? If someone dares to try and hurt you, I definitely won't let them get away with it." Standing atop another tree in the wind forest was a slightly disheveled female elf. She was also looking at the green rays of light in the sky with a worried look on her intricate countenance. This female elf was none other than Blower, and he had been situated here for over 10 days. He murmured to himself, could it be that something happened to Princess Irina in Rodu? Has someone attacked her there? Right at this moment, a burst of rustling footsteps suddenly sounded in the distance. Blower's expression changed slightly as he concealed himself behind a lush canopy of branches and leaves. He cast an intense gaze into the distance, where a group of several dozens of people was approaching. The leader of the group a demon, and the rest of the group comprised weapon-wielding demons and orcs, as well as gagged elves who also had their hands bound. Within the darkness, the sound of footsteps and the cracks of whips on elven skin were particularly pronounced. "They're finally here," flames of fury were burning in Blower's eyes as he appraised the group from afar. A wand appeared in his hand, and he leaned forward as he prepared to attack. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. All of a sudden, 3 arrows flashed through the air before plunging into the throats of 2 demons and an orc. The specks of green light on the tips of these arrows exploded within their throats, creating gaping holes in their necks. The trio died almost without any struggles. "We've been ambushed." The demon leader let loose a roar of rage as he raised a hand, following which an earthen wall appeared before him. An arrow pierced into the wall, and its sharp tip was almost able to puncture through to the other side before exploding amid a puff of dust and debris. The group of orcs and demons immediately burst into an uproar. All of them readied their weapons as they looked around with tense expressions, trying to find their assailant. Despite their best efforts, 2 more demons were killed by arrows in quick succession. A lithe and graceful figure traversed through the forest, harvesting the lives of demons and orcs with bow and arrow like a deity of death. "Why is she here?" Blower was just about to attack the demons and orcs when a hint of surprise appeared on his face at the sight of the figure racing through the forest. He didn't hesitate any longer as he raised his wand toward the demon leader. Green light quickly converged, forming a saber-toothed beast that pounced toward the demon. "Where are they?" Krasu and Novan emerged from the teleportation formation with furrowed brows. Both of them looked at the horrified and wary black-robed figures, then at the wounded and dazed Josh, and finally at the 5th Street, which had virtually been razed to the ground. It was Alex. "I didn't think that he was still alive." Novan looked around with a surprised expression. Krasu strode forward as he clicked his tongue in wonder. 6 10th tier beings were killed, and even Benson's eye beast was slain. Benson himself was most likely wounded as well. The duo of Alex and Irina really is unstoppable. I'm really glad I'm not their enemy. Meanwhile, Novan wore a concerned expression as he murmured to himself, orcs, demons, and forest trolls. All of them have joined forces to attack Princess Irina in Rodu in such a blatant manner. It appears that they no longer wish to uphold peace. Not necessarily. 3 years ago, over 10 of their 10th tier beings were killed during their attempt to assassinate Alex. Now, 6 more have perished in their attempt to assassinate Irina, but both Alex and Irina are still alive. Krasu shook his head with a smile as he chuckled. They have to reconsider whether they can beat us humans and elves in a war. Greetings, Master Novan, Master Krasu. Josh rose to his feet with the assistance of the black-robed men around him before cupping his fist in a salute to the 2 great magic casters. His features were still deathly pale, and there was a haunted look in his eyes. Krasu glanced at Josh, then at the 2 halves of his griffin steed on the ground, and he said with a hint of mockery, I didn't think you would have gotten here so quickly, Your Highness. You're looking a little worse for wear. Were you injured during the battle here earlier? You have to be more careful. I've heard that it's not a good idea to walk these streets at night, because the ghosts of your past may catch up to you. Josh's expression was slightly strained, but he still did his best to maintain a calm facade as he replied, I was concerned for Princess Irina's safety, so I came here as quickly as I could. Krasu completely disregarded Josh's strained expression as he continued, then, did you see Alex? Alex is already dead, but Princess Irina was taken by an unknown man. I'm not sure if that man harbors ill will for Princess Irina, and I'll deploy troops to chase them down. Josh shook his head in response, but he seemed a little reluctant to look Krasu in the eye as he spoke. I see. You'd better hurry up, then. After all, you won't be so lucky all the time. Krasu nodded before turning to Novan with a wide smile, and said, let's go have another drink to celebrate the fact that Alex is still alive. Complete and utter exhaustion radiated from every single muscle fiber in Mag's body. Mag felt as if his soul were hovering outside his body, and that every last shred of his energy had been sapped away. He finally understood just how fearsome the debilitation effect that the system had mentioned was. He was suddenly struck by a sense of lingering fear. If Ozzy hadn't appeared, he would most likely have been lying somewhere on the 5th Street, being killed by a certain black-robed figure. If it weren't for the warm embrace behind him, he could have fallen off the griffin's back already, and been reduced to a patch of crimson graffiti on the face of a certain building. Irina's embrace was very warm and very soft. Even in such a terrible condition, Mag could still feel the warmth being transferred into his cheek, as well as the faint scent of orchids in the air. What's wrong, Alex? Irina cradled the feeble Mag in her arms with a nervous look on her face. Green light flowed from her fingertip, injecting itself into Mag's body. The ray of green light surging toward her from the distance had already dwindled down to the extent that it was barely visible. Mag had been gallant and invincible a moment ago, but he had suddenly slumped into her arms, seemingly having lost all of his power in an instant. Even his heart had almost completely stopped beating, and Irina was thrown into a blind panic. Her life magic was quickly nourishing Mag's body, and his heart began to beat again as his feeble muscles slowly regained their energy. All of the overexerted cells within his body were also revitalized, and Mag's fingers twitched, but he continued to play dead in Irina's warm embrace. 10 minutes later, Irina looked down at Mag with a calm expression, and asked, how long are you going to play dead? Over 50 kilometers to the south of Rodu, space warped and twisted as a portly blood-stained figure stumbled out of a spatial rift with his hand over his chest. A black long sword pierced through the shadows before puncturing Benson's heart, and the tip of the sword protruded out of his chest before it was slowly withdrawn. Benson turned around with wide eyes, staring at the black shadow. Within the holy spatial palace, the soul lamp at the very top exploded. The elderly demon looking after the palace looked up with shock and horror in his eyes before exclaiming, "Our patriarch is dead." The urgent sound of a horn rang out across the entire territory of the spatial demons. A series of powerful demons hurriedly emerged from their cave abodes before rushing toward the holy palace. This was the most urgent horn signal in their spatial demon race, and all spatial demons at or above the 7th grade had to travel to the holy spatial place immediately after hearing it. Otherwise, they would be dealt an extremely severe punishment. The elders of the spatial demon race were huddled together with grave expressions, discussing something among themselves while the normal demons stood in the palace, wondering what was going on. News of Benson's death quickly spread among all of the spatial demons gathered in the holy spatial palace. Emotions of grief and horror were contagious, spreading from one demon to the next. Benson's power was one of the vital factors behind the spatial demon race's position as one of the 3 most powerful subspecies of the demon race. "Our patriarch has been in seclusion this entire time, how has he passed away?" a spatial demon asked with a perplexed expression. The elderly demon who was looking after the palace replied in a grief-stricken voice, "Our patriarch received some news today, and he immediately traveled to Rodu thereafter. Less than an hour since that time, his soul lamp exploded, which means that he's already dead. The humans must be behind this. How can mere humans possibly be capable of killing our patriarch? Alex is already dead, so no one in the human race can pose a threat to our patriarch." Exactly. Our patriarch can definitely rank as one of the 3 most powerful beings of the demon race. He also has his eye beast to assist him. If he wants to escape, who can stop him? All of the demons were still full of skepticism. This was something that they simply couldn't accept. Of course, all of them were also fearful for the future of the spatial demon race. Without their patriarch to lead them, they were most likely going to be oppressed by demons from other powerful subspecies. A slightly older spatial demon stepped forward with a black chunk of metal in his hand as he yelled, "Alex isn't dead. Prior to our patriarch's death, he sent a message to me. He says that he encountered Alex in Rodu, and was severely wounded in a battle with him. However, he'd already left Rodu at the time, which means he was killed by someone else on the way back." The entire palace instantly fell silent. Everyone was staring at the black chunk of metal in the demon's hand with horror in their eyes. Alex isn't dead. This news combined with the news of Benson's death caught them completely off guard. After a prolonged silence, a demon with a horrified look on his face asked, "Our patriarch is dead, yet Alex is still alive. Is he going to exact revenge on our spatial demon race now?" Many of the demons were very concerned upon hearing this. With the spatial demon patriarch dead, who would be able to stand against Alex? Our patriarch is dead. The 3rd elder's soul lamp was snuffed out. The same thing was happening in many demon, orc, and forest troll settlements, sending emotions of grief and terror spreading through all 3 races. These events reminded many people of a certain night 3 days ago, when many powerful beings among their 3 races had also been slain by Alex. However, on this occasion, no one knew exactly what had happened in Rodu, so they didn't know just who had killed all of these 10th tier powerful beings. On the largest central island of the Demon Islands, there was a massive inky black palace. At the summit of the palace stood 2 black figures, one thin and one rather portly. They were standing around 2 meters away from each other, and both of them were looking in Rodu's direction. "Benson's dead." The fat demon broke the silence first. "I didn't think that Alex would still be alive." The thin demon's voice was tinged with a hint of fury. 3 years ago, our demon race sacrificed 4 10th tier powerful beings to kill him. On this occasion, we've lost 2 more 10th tier warriors during this attempt to kill Irina, and even Benson is dead. Almost a third of all of the powerful beings in our demon race have perished for nothing. The fat demon clenched his fists with an enraged expression. The thin demon quickly composed himself as he said, "Our 3 races have lost so many powerful beings, yet the human race hasn't suffered any losses. Could it be that Josh and Alex teamed up to swindle all of us 3 years ago? Perhaps the two of them joined forces to kill all of the 10th tier beings deployed by our three races, then spread a false tale of Alex's death? Also, the human race now has more 10th tier powerful beings than any of our three races. If they forge an alliance with the elves and the dwarves, our three-race coalition may not be able to beat them. Those sly humans! The fat demon gritted his teeth before asking, "What should we do now?" Andre really is a sly old fox. During the past few decades while he's been in power, the human race has steadily grown more and more powerful. However, his two sons are still very young, and they're certainly nowhere near as sly or intelligent as Andre himself. A cold smile appeared on the thin demon's face as he said, "Humans have limited lifespan, and Andre will die eventually. The day he dies is the day we declare war on the human race." "Then what do we do about the peace treaty in 3 months?" the fat demon asked with furrowed brows. "Sign it for now. Give them what they want, it'll all be ours eventually anyway." Lying in Irina's warm embrace, Mag opened his eyes in a slightly awkward manner. He was greeted by the sight of a pair of towering soft mountains, beyond which was Irina's slightly angry, yet still exquisitely beautiful face. He tried to support himself to his feet with his hands, only for them to press against a patch of smooth and delicate skin. Mag's heart jolted in response, and he almost fell off the griffin's back at the sight of the meaningful expression on Irina's face. He hurriedly sat up before withdrawing his hands from Irina's calf. He didn't dare to look into Irina's eyes, and the atmosphere became a little awkward. "Did it feel good?" Irina asked with an amused smile. Well, Mag suddenly calmed down at the sight of Irina's amused smile. He was a man who had seen countless beauties, how could he back down in the face of a woman? With that in mind, he nodded with a smile, and replied, "It sure did. Your skin is very soft and smooth, yet fine and supple. Then how about here?" Irina picked up Mag's hand and dragged it toward her chest. In the end, Mag was still the first one to back down. Just as he was about to make contact with the alluring mountains on her chest, Mag withdrew his hand like lightning. She wasn't playing by the rules. Even though Mag wasn't an extremely uptight or traditional man, he was a person with a moral compass, and he had his boundaries. "Look at your stupid face. You haven't changed at all, even after all these years." Irina burst into tinkling laughter at the sight of Mag's slightly overwhelmed expression as if she were seeing something downright hilarious. Mag looked at Irina with a hint of emotional turmoil in his heart. He had inherited all of Alex's memories, but he still couldn't completely allow himself to be Alex and accept Irina. All of Alex's memories about Irina had been wiped away, so to him, she was just an elven woman whom he'd only known for 2 days. Even though she was Amy's mother, and her exquisite beauty as well as her straightforward personality were both very alluring, he still couldn't allow himself to essentially adopt Alex's personality and take advantage of her. He simply wasn't that kind of person. "It's been 3 years, I've finally found you." Irina threw herself into Mag's arms, holding tightly onto him as if she were trying to fuse her body with his. As she spoke, her voice was filled with elation. Mag stiffened momentarily before his heart gradually softened. He slowly wound one arm gently around her waist while stroking her back with his other hand. This woman was one of the most powerful beings on the entire continent, and had dared to face 6 10th tier powerful beings on her own. She was willing to oppose the entire world for him and Amy, yet she seemed so frail and delicate in that moment. The storm continued to rage as droplets of rain fell relentlessly onto the magic shield around them, but there was only an atmosphere of intimacy and tranquility within the magic shield. Mag gently held Irina in his arms, basking in the peaceful moment. In that instant, he was suddenly struck by an impulse. If Irina became his wife, it would surely be very interesting for them to live in his restaurant as a family of 3. The griffin continued to fly toward the west before descending in front of that cave on the Exemption Mountain. It then turned around to look at Mag with excitement in its eyes. "Howl! You're a griffin, not a dog." Mag rolled his eyes in response. It was quite unbefitting of such a powerful griffin to be yelping like an excited puppy. Irina sat up within Mag's arms before fixing her gaze on his mask. "Is there something on my face?" Mag asked in a slightly uncomfortable manner. Irina nodded, and replied, "It's a little ugly." Mag was completely speechless, just as if something had gotten stuck in his throat. Irina then reached over and removed his mask before nodding with a content smile. "Much better." Mag faltered momentarily before climbing down from the griffin to avoid the slightly awkward scenario. He then began to examine the cave that was situated almost at the summit of the mountain. The magic shield had already been withdrawn by Irina. A green ball of light now hovered by her side, illuminating the entire cave with its soft glow. The signs of the griffin's activity could be seen in every part of the cave, and there was a pile of bones in one of the corners. Mag then turned to the purple-striped griffin, which was rubbing its large head against his body in a fawning manner, and a sense of sympathy suddenly welled up in his heart. He gently stroked the scar on the griffin's forehead as memories of the battles he had fought with this griffin by his side began to flash through his mind. It had stayed here for 3 whole years, waiting for his return, even though he could very likely have been already dead. Right when he needed help the most, it had descended from the sky to lend him its assistance. No matter how perilous the situation or how powerful the opponent, it seemed to be perpetually fearless. "Ozzy," Mag called out in a gentle voice. Haha, Ozzy was even more excited after hearing Mag call its name. It was wagging its tail with all its might and trying to lick Mag's face as if it were a dog that had been separated from its owner for a long time. Mag couldn't handle its overwhelming enthusiasm, and he pressed his hands against Ozzy's head as he commanded, "Sit." Even after 3 years, Ozzy is just as dumb as ever. If I'd known this earlier, I would have named it Stupid Ozzy. How about we change its name from this day forth? Irina suggested with a serious expression as she stroked Ozzy's head. So she was the one who made up this weird name. Mag slapped his forehead with a resigned expression. Naming a kitten Ugly Duckling and naming a griffin Ozzy, this mother and daughter duo sure was gifted in the art of naming. Mag observed a minute of silence for the griffin in his heart before attempting to refuse. "I think we should keep its name as is. Ozzy rolls off the tongue quite well. No, a name is something that's extremely important. Stupid Ozzy reflects this griffin completely accurately for what it is, and it's such an intimate name, it's like it's our stupid son," Irina retorted with a serious shake of her head. Well, Mag was at a loss for a reply. While Mag was still scrambling for a response, Irina cut off his train of thought, and asked, "Mag or Alex, which one do you prefer now?" "Just call me Mag," Mag immediately replied. Even though this wasn't exactly a new name, perhaps it heralded a new positive beginning. "Mag's not bad." Irina nodded in response. She then began to walk circles around Mag with an interrogative expression as she asked, "What happened during these past 3 years? How did you become like this? How did you manage to recover your full power earlier? What did you do with Amy during these past 3 years? How did you learn to cook? Have you have any intimate interactions with any other women during these past 3 years?" The rapid string of questions had Mag completely reeling. He had thought that an ethereal elf like her would have transcended beyond all of these trivial matters, but it appeared that in this respect, she was just like any other woman. "That's a long story. If I had to answer all of these questions, it would take me days on end." Mag was a little reluctant to meet Irina's gaze. What was he supposed to say? Was he supposed to tell he transmigrated to this world and he just so happened to have a system that made him like this? Mag had already decided not to tell anyone about the system and the fact that he was a transmigrator. It wouldn't be a good thing for such unimaginable details to be revealed in this world. "I haven't actually recovered all of my power. Just then, I used a special method to forcibly recover my full power for a short time, which is why I was so feeble afterward." Mag glanced at the opening of the cave with a slightly concerned expression as he said, "Amy is currently alone in the second prince's manor. Would you be able to set up a teleportation formation to get me back there?" Following the complete failure of the assassination attempt against Irina, the fact that Alex was still alive quickly became known through Rodu and beyond. Anyone in a position of power was made aware of this news, and the incident created a massive stir. Alex was a symbolic existence in the Roth Empire. He was the invincible war god who guarded the empire's borders, as well as the vastly renowned dragon-slaying warrior. He held an extremely high position in the hearts of the general public, and he was the pride of the human race. With him around, even the giant dragons had to lower their proud heads to the humans, whom they had once regarded as mere ants. Following Alex's death 3 years ago, the entire empire was in grief. The citizens of the empire lined up in a procession that stretched for over 10 kilometers to mourn his passing, which was a clear indication of just how loved and revered he was. Some were initially skeptical about whether Alex was dead, but they were eventually forced to believe it. After all, with Alex's personality, there was no way that he could lie in hiding and do nothing for 3 years if he was still alive. But who would have thought that Alex would return to them once again on another rainy night? Not only that, but he had announced his return to the entire world in the most emphatic fashion. The invincible war god had returned, and this night was destined to be a sleepless one for many of the citizens of Rodu. Your Highness, Alex appeared and rescued Irina. Our plan has failed. A black shadow appeared outside a certain pavilion. He was soaking wet from the rain, giving him a rather disheveled appearance. Sean looked into the distance for a long while before slowly turning around with a cold expression as he commanded, "Kill everyone involved and make sure there's no evidence that can link me to this incident." Quine's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, but he still immediately nodded in response before disappearing into the stormy night. "Alex, you're always foiling my plans. I let you leave that street alive 3 years ago for old time's sake, but that really was a big mistake." Sean looked out into the rain with a sinister expression on his face. "Benson's dead." On the top floor of the tallest building in the royal palace, a black shadow soundless appeared. "Good." Andrei cast his gaze out toward his empire, and a sense of pride suddenly welled up in his heart. "I've been waiting for this day for several decades. If the borders of the Roth Empire can become the borders of the Norland continent before I pass away, my name will go down in history." The black shadow remained silent. "It's time to forge a new alliance with the elven race. Those idiots make for superb cannon fodder." Andrei withdrew his gaze before heading downstairs. "The ice cream is so delicious, but where did Father go? It would be a pity if I have to eat such a delicious cake alone." Amy was sitting in the kitchen with a forlorn expression, looking at the ice cream cake before her, which was missing a corner. The ice cream cake carrier came with a cooling feature. Even though it couldn't completely replicate conditions within a freezer, it was quite effective in slowing down the melting process. At the very least, the ice cream cake showed no signs of melting up to this point. Meow Ugly Duckling walked in circles around Amy's stool, looking up at the ice cream cake on the table with a burning desire in its eyes. It was a huge fan of ice cream, and it had thought that there would be no more ice cream here in Rodu. However, a massive chunk of ice cream even bigger than its own body was sitting on the table right at this very moment, and it had to be super delicious. Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression, and said, "Father says that eating too much ice cream will make you fat." "Ugly Duckling, you're already so fat, if you keep eating, you won't be far away from becoming a roast goose." Meow. Ugly Duckling cowered in a horrified manner, but it still couldn't repress its yearning for the ice cream on the table. It looked up at Amy with a pitiable expression, and tears were already swirling around in its eyes. "All right, but you can only have a small mouthful," Amy conceded with a resigned sigh. Meow. Ugly Duckling immediately began to rub its little head against Amy's leg in excitement. Amy pursed her lips before placing a small plate onto the ground. She picked up the knife on the table in a slightly cumbersome manner, then sliced off a small piece of ice cream and placed it onto the plate. The triangular cake was covered in strawberry ice cream, and its defined layers were quite clearly visible on its cross-sectional face. There was also a small strawberry on top of the cake, and the aromas of milk and strawberries were wafting through the air, immediately making Ugly Duckling's eyes light up. It slowly made its way over to the plate, and then walked in a circle around it before extending a small paw to touch the cake tentatively. However, it withdrew its paw halfway to the cake before sniffing at it with its little nose. A human-like smile of elation then appeared on its face as it extended its little tongue to take a lick. Right at this moment, a burst of golden light appeared in the kitchen. Ugly Duckling faltered momentarily upon seeing this, following which two figures appeared in the room. Splat! One of the humanoid figures just so happened to land on its cake, completely flattening it. Ugly Duckling's face was splattered with ice cream as it stared at the empty plate before it with a shell-shocked expression. Father! Big Sister Irina! Amy was filled with surprise and elation at the sight of the two figures that had just appeared in the room. Mag was the one who had landed on the ice cream cake, and he had to catch the table to prevent himself from slipping over. He looked down to discover a flattened slice of ice cream and a resentful Ugly Duckling looking up at him. A hint of guilt welled up in his ear as he withdrew his gaze in a rather awkward manner. He turned to Amy, and his expression immediately softened as he smiled, and said, "We're back, little Amy." The battle that had taken place just then was actually quite brief, but it had been extremely perilous. The battle with Benson had been fraught with peril, and that black shadow that had appeared on the 5th Street in the end was most likely an unfathomably powerful being from the royal palace. There had been rumors circulating of such a being existing within the royal palace, but no one had ever seen him in action, so even Alex wasn't sure of his ability to defeat him in battle. In any case, that mysterious figure was most likely one of the main reasons why Andrei had reigned over the empire for so long. What he was sure of was that if he had actually killed Josh, it would have been extremely difficult for him to escape from the 5th Street after losing all of his power. However, through this event, he was able to confirm something. Andrei was definitely now aware of the fact that Alex was still alive, but he had no intention of killing Alex. Mag wasn't surprised that this was the case. After all, a dead Alex was far less valuable to the Roth Empire than one that was still alive. As such, Mag was feeling quite fortunate that he had been able to survive that prior ordeal. His top priority now was to think of a way to dodge all of Irina's questions. Each and every one of those questions felt like a trap, and Mag didn't dare to answer them in fear for his own safety. Xiaomi, a gentle also appeared in Irina's eyes as she made her way toward Amy with the black cat cradled in her arms. She then adopted a serious expression, and asked, "How could you eat such delicious food by yourself?" A corner of the ice cream cake on the table was missing, revealing the cross-section of the cake as if it were a work of art. The pink ice cream and yellow cream were giving off an intoxicating fragrance, immediately making Irina's eyes light up. Mag was a little speechless. Irina had asked him many questions about Amy back in the cave, but who would have thought that she'd be more interested in the ice cream cake on the table than she was in Amy? Could it be that Amy had inherited her foodie gene from Irina? No, I was waiting for father to come back and eat it with me. Amy shook her head before looking at Mag and Irina with a perplexed expression as she said, "Father, you said you had something important to do, but you came back with Big Sister Irina. Is seeing Big Sister Irina more important than eating cake with me?" Mag looked at Amy and contemplated how he was going to explain the situation. After all, he couldn't tell her that he'd left her behind to save Irina's life, but he didn't want her to feel as if he had abandoned her for some trivial matter, either. "Oh, I understand. It's okay." Before Mag even had a chance to say anything, a thought suddenly occurred to Amy, and she nodded with a knowing expression on her little face. "What are you talking about?" Mag looked at Amy's expression and wondered just what was going through that little head of hers. In the meantime, he was still scrambling for an excuse to explain the situation. Now clearly wasn't a good time to reveal to her that Irina was her mother. There were many people in this world who still wanted to kill him, and he didn't yet have the power to protect Amy and Irina. 3 years ago, they had dared to assassinate Alex in Rodu, and 3 years after that, they attempted to assassinate Irina in the exact same place. If he were to blow his cover and it was revealed that he hadn't actually recovered to his peak, then he would immediately be hunted down. In that situation, neither he nor Irina would be able to ensure Amy's safety. As such, it wasn't the time to reveal the truth yet. As opposed to revealing to Amy the identity of her mother only for Irina to have to depart and return to the Wind Forest, Mag would rather have Amy remain under the impression that her mother was still on the moon. He was going to tell her the truth when he had the power to protect both of them. He had discussed this notion with Irina back in the cave, and she had agreed to this after some hesitation. If the important thing he was referring to is bringing me here, then that's fine, but if he was to bring back other women, Irina turned to Mag with a dangerous smile. A chill suddenly ran down Mag's spine, and he shuddered as he turned away from Irina. He pointed at the manifestation of himself as he said, "Amy, get rid of this thing for now." "Sure." Amy nodded obediently before waving a little hand, upon which the manifestation immediately disappeared. Meow! Right at this moment, a feeble cry sounded from within Irina's arms. A little furry black head emerged, surveying its surroundings carefully with a pair of pitiable green eyes. Ugly Duckling was just looking at its ruined ice cream cake with a grief-stricken expression when it abruptly raised its head and caught sight of that black cat. It immediately arched its back and all of its orange fur stood up on ends as if it were preparing for battle. This was the first time it had seen another cat, and its reaction was even more exaggerated than when it had encountered a giant dragon for the first time. Meow! The black cat was given a fright, and immediately buried its head back into Irina's chest. "Is that another ugly duckling?" Amy looked at the black cat in Irina's arms with a curious expression. However, she shook her head after carefully inspecting the cat, and concluded, "No, this cat is much prettier than ugly duckling. That should be a little black kitty, not an ugly duckling." Meow! Ugly duckling meowed in an indignant manner. Was it really that ugly? It was clearly far prettier than that little black thing. "It's all right, you're the ugliest, and no one can take that from you." Amy leaned down and stroked Ugly Duckling's head in consolation. Meow! Ugly Duckling lowered its head in a completely dejected manner. The black cat carefully stuck out its head again and began to appraise Ugly Duckling in a curious manner. Irina carefully inspected the black cat before nodding as she decided, "Your fur is really black, so I'll call you Knight. If someone asks you why you're so black, you can tell them it's because you're Knight." Was that supposed to be a deadpan joke? Mag raised an eyebrow. "Wow, that's such a cool name." Amy's eyes lit up as an excited look appeared on her face, and she asked, "Then, should we also buy a white cat and name it Day?" "That's quite a good name as well." Irina nodded in agreement. However, she then looked at Knight and shook her head as she replied, "But I don't think getting a white cat is a good idea." "Is that because night and day can't coexist?" Mag was struck by a sense of exasperation as he listened to this conversation. As expected, Amy and Irina had perfectly synchronized reflex arcs. "Go and play now. If you can't even beat that fat orange, then don't go around telling everyone that you're my cat." Irina placed the black cat down on the ground with a serious expression. As soon as Knight settled on the ground, it retreated toward Irina's legs while appraising Ugly Duckling with curiosity in its emerald eyes. However, after hearing Irina's words, it mustered up the courage to meow at Ugly Duckling. Knight was also only a small cat, but it appeared to be quite a bit older than Ugly Duckling. It was most likely 3 to 4 months old, but it was extremely thin due to malnutrition. As such, it was around the same size as the much more portly Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling immediately hid behind Amy's back, looking at Knight with a tense and fearful expression. "You're such a scaredy cat, Ugly Duckling. If you're going to keep this up, then don't go telling anyone that you're my duckling, either," Amy pouted with a critical expression as she looked at Ugly Duckling. "Meow!" Ugly Duckling cat a pitiable glance toward Amy before reluctantly emerging from behind her. "Meow!" Knight meowed at Ugly Duckling before taking a hesitant step toward it. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked up at Amy, and it didn't dare to retreat. However, it then looked at Knight, and neither did it dare to advance. As such, it was at a loss for what to do and rolled over onto its back, wagging its little tail as a gesture of truce to Knight. "You're so embarrassing. You're no duckling of mine." Amy buried her face into her palm. An element of intimacy was injected into the reunion this rainy night by these two adorable cats. The warm yellow light of the oil lamp in the room seemed to have completely kept the chill of the ongoing storm at bay. Mag went into the bathroom to change back into a new set of clothes that was identical to the set he'd worn prior to his departure. He then re-entered the room and closed the window along the way. Amy and Irina were still trying to encourage the two kittens to fight each other while Mag picked up the knife on the table and plated 3 slices of ice cream. He also cut out 2 smaller slices of cake for the pair of kittens. "Have some ice cream cake, it's going to melt soon." Mag handed a plate of ice cream cake each to Amy and Irina, along with a pair of spoons. Ugly Duckling immediately withdrew its gaze from Knight before turning to Mag with a pitiable expression. It'd been just about to taste the ice cream cake earlier, only for it to be squashed by Mag. Just the mere thought of that traumatic experience brought a tear to its eyes. Knight was also looking up at Mag with a curious expression. It didn't know what Mag was carrying, but it was curious about everything. Mag was feeling rather apologetic at the sight of Ugly Duckling's pitiable expression. After all, he would also be feeling quite indignant if someone were to appear out of the blue and ruin his meal. He placed the 2 smaller plates in front of Ugly Duckling and Knight with a smile, and said, "These are yours." Meow. Ugly Duckling's dejected expression was immediately replaced by excitement. It approached the ice cream cake and took a whiff before licking the ice cream with its little tongue. Its eyes immediately lit up as a blissful expression appeared on its face. Meow. Knight was looking at Ugly Duckling with a hint of curiosity in its eyes. It then turned its attention to its own slice of ice cream cake. The combination of aromas wafting toward it from the cake was something that it had never experienced before, and its eyes immediately lit up. After a brief hesitation, it emulated Ugly Duckling, sticking out its little tongue to lick the ice cream as well. The icy cold sensation immediately made it withdraw its tongue, and it fell over from surprise before immediately rolling to its feet while staring at the cake with a dumbfounded expression. However, aside from that icy sensation, the glorious flavor of strawberry ice cream was also melting on the tip of its tongue. It had never tasted anything so delicious before, and its eyes lit up once again. After staring at the slice of ice cream cake for a while longer in a hesitant manner, it glanced at Ugly Duckling, which was thoroughly enjoying its own slice of ice cream cake. In the end, it was unable to resist the temptation, and slowly made its way over to the ice cream cake before taking another lick. However, the icy cold sensation didn't scare it off this time. Instead, it also began to enjoy its ice cream with an elated expression, just like Ugly Duckling was. Irina accepted her plate and looked at the intricate slice of cake with an intrigued expression. Pink ice cream had covered the top and side of the cake, while the individual layers were visible from the smooth cross-sectional cuts. The yellow cream of the cake and the pink ice cream created an adorable color combination, and the strawberry on top capped off what appeared to be an artistic masterpiece. The aromas of strawberry and cream were wafting toward her, and just the mere sight of the cake was making her salivate. "Father and I spent an entire afternoon to make this super delicious ice cream cake. Only big sister Irina gets to eat it." Amy put her plate down on the table before scooping up a small spoonful of cake, which was comprised of a 50:50 ratio between ice cream and cake. She placed the spoon in her mouth, and a blissful smile appeared on her face as she swayed from side to side in an adorable manner. A smile also appeared on Irina's face at the sight of Amy's adorable display. She then turned back to the ice cream on her plate, and an expectant look appeared in her eyes. This cake had been made by the 2 most important people in her life. Not a day went by during the past 3 years when she didn't think about them, and it felt like a dream come true to reunite with them. "Have some." Mag was also looking at Irina with a gentle expression, but he was actually feeling a little nervous. Even though he had made ice cream cake countless times in the test field for the god of cookery, this was the first time he had made one in the real world, and he had made it with Amy. Furthermore, he didn't even know whether Irina had a sweet tooth or not, so he was a little worried that the cake wouldn't be to her liking. "All right." Irina nodded before picking up her spoon, emulating Amy as she scooped up a spoonful of cake with a 50:50 cake to cream ratio before placing the spoon into her own mouth. As soon as the spoonful of cake found its way onto her tongue, her eyes immediately lit up. The flavor of strawberries melted slowly on the tip of her tongue along with a sweet milky fragrance. The smooth and icy texture was accompanied by a sweet and delectable taste. Immediately thereafter, the creamy mousse took the center of the stage, filling her mouth with a richer flavor that was just as delicious. It was like the perfect combination of fire and ice, creating an incomparable culinary experience. Irina felt as if she were standing in a snowy plain, and had suddenly come across a small yellow flower in full bloom. The combination of surprise and elation from that scenario was a perfect rendition of what she was currently experiencing. After swallowing her first mouthful of ice cream cake, the flavor of strawberries and cream swirled around the tip of her tongue, urging her to take her second mouthful. "It's delicious." Irina couldn't help but praise it. She looked at the cake on her plate, then turned her gaze toward Meg, and her eyes were practically glowing. She loved all types of desserts as eating sweet foods always put her in a good mood. Back when she had first decided to travel the Norland continent, the biggest motivating factor behind her decision was that she wanted to taste all of the delicious foods and desserts that were on offer outside the Wind Forest. However, after traveling to so many places and tasting a vast smorgasbord of desserts from all races, nothing could compare to this small slice of cake. It turned out that what she had been searching for was right beside her all along. "You didn't hide the fact that you could cook from me when we first met, did you?" Irina looked at Meg with a skeptical expression. It was simply extraordinary that his cooking skills would improve so drastically in just 3 short years. This is probably what people call talent. Meg shrugged as the smile on his face widened. It seemed that Irina was very pleased with his cake. "Hee, if you say so." Irina clearly didn't believe what Meg was saying, but she wore a blissful smile on her face as she ate another spoonful of ice cream. Have father and big sister Irina already taken the next step? Amy was staring at the two of them with curiosity in her large blue eyes, winking rapidly to try and catch Meg's attention. Meg merely smiled and pretended that he couldn't see what Amy was doing. "This is the 4th day Boss Meg has been away. I miss him so much." Harrison was sitting on the stairs outside Mamie Restaurant's front door, looking up at the starry night sky with a lost expression as if all of the energy in his entire body had been sapped away. "What are doing? It's not like Boss Meg is dead." George thrust a small flagon of wine at him before taking a seat by his side and heaving a faint sigh. "But then again, I really do miss him as well. You sound like a love-struck teenage girl. I'm getting goosebumps." Harrison scooted to the side with a disdainful look, trying to distance himself away from George. "You don't understand my pain. I'm not the only one in my family who misses Boss Mag, my entire family misses him. Do you know what it feels like for me to go home every day, only to have my wife and kids surround me and ask me if Boss Mag is back as soon as I walk into the door? I'm so desperate I'm even contemplating making a trip to Rodeo so I can get Boss Mag to cook a young Joe fried rice for me to take back to my wife. She hasn't had a good meal for days." George's expression was filled with concern and resignation. Harrison patted George's shoulder and took the lid off the flagon of wine before handing it back to George. As he did so, he wore a sympathetic look, and consoled, "It's all right, Boss Mag will be back soon." Sigh, George took the flagon from Harrison and took a sip before handing it back to him. He then rose to his feet and dusted himself off with a wry smile on his face. "All right, I have to head back home now. Otherwise, the little ones are going to nag my wife again. The doctor says that she could be due for delivery in the next few days." Harrison's eyes immediately lit up as he said, "Looks like I'll have another godson soon." Trajay's expression immediately darkened upon hearing this. "I meant goddaughter," Harrison hurriedly corrected himself with a sheepish smile. "It has to be a daughter this time," Trajay said with a determined expression before waving farewell to Harrison and climbing onto a nearby horse-drawn carriage. Harrison looked at the departing horse-drawn carriage and scratched his head as he murmured to himself, "Judging by the ongoing trend, it's very likely going to be another godson." At this moment, two excited young women came approaching from nearby, and Harrison yelled out to them, "Save your energy, Boss Mag isn't back yet, and he won't be back tomorrow, either." The smiles on the two young women's faces gradually vanished. Looking at their resentful and disappointed expressions, Harrison was suddenly feeling a lot better, and he also departed on his own horse-drawn carriage. On the balcony of Mamie Restaurant, three figures were looking up at the night sky. Due to the difference in their heights, they were like a set of Matryoshka dolls positioned next to each other. Bablau looked up at the bright moon, and asked, "Mia, when are Boss Mag and Amy going to come back?" "Boss said he'd be back after 5 days, so he should be returning the day after tomorrow," Mia replied. "What about big sister Aisha? When will she be back?" Anna asked with a concerned look in her eyes. "Aisha didn't tell me where she was going, but she promised that she'd be back." Mia shook her head, and she was also slightly concerned as she recalled Aisha's grim expression before her departure. However, she could sense Anna's concern, so she put on a smile, and said, "When Boss comes back, the restaurant will reopen, and Aisha will be back by then for sure." Anna nodded in response. She was still feeling rather worried, but she didn't say anything further on this matter. The three of them were silent for a while. "I really want to eat kebabs." Babla was the first one to break the silence. Yabimiya gulped, and chimed in, "I really want to eat Rigiamo." Anna thought to herself for a moment before whispering, "I want to eat Yongzhou fried rice." Gruel, someone's stomach suddenly began to rumble. "My life has no meaning without spicy grilled fish." Vivian sat on the roof of the city lord's castle with her long legs dangling down over the edge. She was supporting herself with her arms, and looking up at the night sky in a dejected manner. Not only did Boss Mag go to Rodu, he even took Luna away. "What am I supposed to do?" Vivian sighed in a display of sheer and utter boredom. "They'll be back the day after tomorrow. Boss Mag received the Best Dish Award today." An amused voice sounded from down below. Vivian looked down to discover City Lord Michael standing down below with his hands clasped behind his back and a smile on his face. "Really? Is Boss Mag that amazing?" Vivian jumped down from the roof as she stared at Michael with incredulity in her eyes. She had attended royal banquets at the Roth Empire in the past, and she could still clearly recall the grand palace filled with countless tables and chairs, with all types of delicious food piled onto those tables. She didn't know how many chefs would be required to cook so many dishes. It was incredible that Mag had managed to stand out among these countless chefs, securing the Best Dish Award for himself in the end. But doesn't that mean Boss Mag is going to stay in Rodu now? A thought suddenly occurred to Vivian as a concerned look appeared on her face. If Boss Mag were to remain in Rodu, then she wouldn't get to eat spicy grilled fish ever again. Her symptoms had been completely suppressed from her regular consumption of spicy grilled fish, and even though she hadn't had the dish for a few days, those symptoms showed no signs of returning. According to the doctor, the root cause of her condition had almost been remedied, and as long as she continued to eat spicy grilled fish, she would eventually be completely cured. Of course, even if that day did arrive, Vivian wouldn't be able to give up on spicy grilled fish anyway, as it was simply far too delicious and addictive. Michael shook his head with a smile, and said, "Don't worry, Boss Mag rejected the king's offer to remain in Rodu, and Principal Novan will bring him back in person. Boss Mag is a man of many talents, and I would be sorely remiss to see him go." "Good." Vivian was very relieved to hear this. "Young mistress, due to the recent influx of extra tailors, all of the custom-made dresses are almost ready. Only the finishing touches need to be applied, and the other styles of dresses are also being produced at a rate that's faster than anticipated. I believe we should increase the number of orders we take for the custom-made dresses. Even at this time at night, the blue suede clothing store was still brightly lit, and Mars wore an excited expression as he stood before Gloria's desk. No, the number of orders can't be changed, but we have to ensure that we produce dresses of the absolute finest quality we're capable of. Gloria contemplated the suggestion for a moment before shaking her head as she said, however, if some of the tailors have extra time on their hands, they can increase the rate of production on the other two styles of dresses. All right. Mars nodded with a smile before exiting the office. The young mistress that he was serving was well on her way to becoming a successful businesswoman. Mr. Mag is going to be back in 2 days, perhaps I can go to him and ask him some questions. I'll finally be able to see him again soon. A faint blush appeared on Gloria's face as she strode over to her window. As soon as Irina finished her slice of cake, Amy looked up at her with an expectant gaze, and asked, "Big sister Irina, after eating this cake, do you want to marry father?" Mag, who was in the process of cleaning the dishes, cast a surreptitious glance toward Irina. Amy's question was very direct and straightforward, setting aside everything else. Was this slice cake enough to make Irina want to marry him? A chef who could evoke within one the impulse to marry them just with their cooking alone was most definitely a successful chef. Of course, there were countless such women lining up in front of Mamie restaurant every day. However, Irina was different, and even Mag was rather curious about her answer. As soon as Mag cast his gaze toward her, he discovered that Irina was also looking at him with a smile, and their eyes met as a result. She licked the final dollop of ice cream off her lips, and a hint of a seductive light appeared in her eyes as she said, "I heard that your mother is the most beautiful woman in this entire world. Even if I wanted to marry him, I'm not sure if your father would dare to take me." Mag felt as if he were a stray rabbit being scrutinized by a hunting leopard, and he withdrew his gaze in a rather fearful manner. Not only was this woman a little scary, she was extremely narcissistic. Is my mother really the most beautiful woman in the world? Amy's eyes immediately lit up. Maybe she shares that title with me. She's the only one with beauty that can compare with mine, Irina replied with a nod. Wow, you're the most beautiful elf I've ever seen, big sister Irina. If my mother is just as beautiful as you, then she must be super beautiful. Amy's eyes were glowing as she looked at Irina. At the same time, she wished that Irina was her mother. Not only was she the most beautiful woman Amy had ever seen, she also struck her with a sense of closeness and intimacy somehow. Of course. Irina nodded confidently in response. Amy clapped her little hands together with elation, and said, "Then father is the luckiest man in the world. He'll get to marry the two most beautiful women in the world." Oh? Would he dare to do that? Irina was still looking at Mag with a smile, but there was a dangerous gleam in her eyes. A shiver ran down Mag's spine. He didn't understand why she was scrutinizing him in such a threatening manner. After all, the so-called pair of most beautiful women in the world were both Irina, so she had no one to be jealous of. Father is super brave. Amy shook her head before turning to Mag as she asked, "Right, father? Here, have some more cake." Mag pretended not to have had the question as he placed 2 more slices of cake down on the table, dodging this dangerous conversation topic with a smile. Indeed, he's a very brave man. Irina glanced at Mag with an ambiguous smile before picking up her spoon to eat her second slice of cake. Mag surreptitiously wiped the cold sweat that had beaded his forehead. What had he done to deserve this? He was suddenly feeling like an asthmatic. Was this what it felt like to be strangled by fate? Mag suddenly discovered that he was developing a hint of fear toward Irina. However, being in her company also somehow gave him a pleasant and exciting feeling. This was something he had never experienced in the presence of any other woman. He was clearly rather uncomfortable, but he kind of enjoyed this feeling for some reason. Could it be that I'm a masochist? Mag asked himself. Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded. A masochist or someone with masochistic tendencies stands on the polar opposite extreme to a sadist. A sadist is an enforcer who is clearly exerting some type of psychological abuse to the masochist, and the latter is resistant to this abuse to a certain extent, but also simultaneously looks forward to it. Due to the fact that these tendencies only arise in the presence of Irina, the system concludes that you're a recessive masochist with selective masochistic tendencies. Why do you always research all of this weird stuff? Mag roared internally. Your current vehement reaction is clearly an attempt to hide the embarrassment you're experiencing from having your innermost desires exposed. This lends further support to the system's assessment, which concludes that you're a masochist, the system replied in a calm manner. Piss off. Mag looked on at Irina with a complex expression. He wanted to deny the system's verdict, but he had to admit that it did have a point. Just what about this woman was evoking this kind of strange reaction in him? Even though she was already Amy's mother, she was still like an energetic young woman, a breath of fresh air. Even after experiencing so many hardships, she wasn't jaded nor cynical in the slightest. Her simplicity and exuberance seemed to be able to culminate into a special type of charisma that was extremely alluring to those around her. Her outward beauty was absolutely breathtaking, but Mag was more interested in her beautiful soul. The entire delicious cake was completely devoured by the 3 people and 2 cats. Ugly Duckling rolled over and tried to shuffle over to Night in an attempt to knock it down. Right at this moment, Night suddenly extended a small black paw and rested it firmly on Ugly Duckling's head. Ugly Duckling immediately relinquished all plans to attack Night as it lay on the ground, not even daring to move. It turned toward Amy's direction with a pitiable expression, but it didn't dare to meow for help. That was a very delicious cake. Irina placed her empty plate gently on the table before giving Mag a tick of approval. Mag nodded with a smile in response. It was naturally a good feeling to be praised for his cooking. Irina then turned toward Amy with a smile, and offered, "Xiaomi, I'm leaving Rodu soon. Is there something you'd like from me? I can give you anything you want." "Anything I want?" Amy looked up at Irina and contemplated this offer carefully before replying, then, "Can I ask big sister Irina to hug me for a while, just as mother would?" Irina looked into Amy's large watery eyes, and she suddenly felt a sob building in the back of her throat. She leaned down and picked Amy up in her arms as she gently said, "I also want to hug you like this every single day. You're so good to me, big sister Irina." Amy closed her eyes with a content expression. The floral scent rising from Irina's body was very soothing, and Amy quickly fell asleep in her warm embrace. In her dreams, the woman on the moon finally descended with a smile on her exquisitely beautiful features. She slowly made her way toward Amy and enveloped her in a warm embrace. A smile appeared on Amy's face as she murmured, "Mother." Irina was choking up a little as she crooned, "I'm here." There was a split second during which Mag was struck by the impulse to ask Irina to stay. The 3 of them could go somewhere far away and live out their lives in leisure as an intimate family of 3. He looked at Amy, who was sleeping in Irina's arms with a content smile on her face, and he suddenly realized just how much he wanted a complete family as well. He had thought that he would be able to give Amy all of the love in the world to ensure a happy childhood. However, he had to admit that maternal love was unique and indispensable, and it was not something that he could offer. "I'm going to work hard so we can be reunited as quickly as possible," Mag vowed to himself. He had to set some things in motion once he returned to Chaos City. Irina held Amy in her arms and swayed her gently from side to side, humming a beautiful melody under her breath. Even though the lyrics were indistinguishable, the song still had a very soothing and calming quality. How strange, who would have thought that the ugly and wrinkly little thing would grow up to be so beautiful? She doesn't even know who I am yet, but she's still so close with me. What a smart little girl. If only I could keep staying by your side. Irina held Amy for a long time, and she only reluctantly turned her gaze away from Amy's little face after her song had drawn to a conclusion. She turned toward Mag, and asked, "When will you come to find me?" Mag looked into Irina's clear eyes and thought about her question carefully before giving a firm reply. 1 year. All right, then I'll wait for you for a year. If you don't come to me in a year, then I'll come to you and Amy. Irina nodded before handing Amy over to Mag. She planted a gentle kiss on Amy's forehead and looked into Mag's eyes for a long while before suddenly rising up onto her toes and pecking him on the cheek. "Mag, remember that you belong to me." A golden teleportation formation appeared beneath Irina's feet, and she abruptly disappeared, leaving behind a dumbstruck Mag, and an equally dumbfounded ugly duckling. Only after a short while did Mag return to his senses as he laid a hand on his cheek. His eyes were still a little glazed over as he blinked a few times. When her lips had come into contact with his cheek, his mind had gone completely blank. Even though that wasn't a threat, it's more effective than countless threats. Mag heaved a faint sigh. From this day forth, he was going to have to work harder than ever. That promise of a year was made to Irina, but it was also a promise to Amy. Mag didn't want to delay the official reunion between the mother and daughter duo for too long. As such, what he had to do now was to try everything he could to attain the power required to protect Irina and Amy within a year. After all, he didn't want Irina to have to come for them in a year. That would certainly be the easier option, but he didn't want Amy to look down on him. He had to be the one to seek out Irina in the Wind Forest rather than the other way around. Mag looked down at Amy, and his expression gradually softened. He would do anything to ensure her happiness. "What's this?" Mag suddenly caught sight of thin green string around Amy's wrist, attached to which was a pea-sized green bead, or perhaps a seed. In any case, it was a semi-transparent object that was emanating faint green light. This bead had most likely been left to Amy by Irina. Mag was very familiar with this green light. It was the same green light that had emanated from Irina's hand during his period of debilitation earlier, and it was filled with vitality. "I don't know what this is, but it must be something very precious." Mag gently tugged Amy's sleeve down a little to conceal the bead, and then wrapped Amy up in his own clothes. After that, he picked up Ugly Duckling from the ground and pushed open the door. The storm had subsided significantly, but the rain was still quite heavy. The butler outside had already fallen asleep as he leaned against banister, but he immediately opened his eyes upon hearing the door being opened. He hurriedly rose to his feet and approached Mag with a fawning smile as he offered, "Are you going out, Master Mag? Please allow me to hold an umbrella for you." "Thank you." Mag nodded with a smile in response. This butler was the perfect witness who could prove that Mag had been in the kitchen this entire time. Furthermore, he really didn't have any hands to spare to hold an umbrella with. After exiting the kitchen, a commotion rang out from nearby. Josh's enraged bellows could be heard amid the sound of things being smashed onto the ground. "What's going on?" Mag asked. "Perhaps one of the servants did something wrong." The butler cast his gaze in that direction with an expression of fear and relief. He was very thankful for the fact that he had been assigned with such a simple task of keeping an eye on Mag and Amy rather than having to face the wrath of Josh directly. Mag nodded and didn't ask any further questions. However, he was feeling slightly forlorn that he wasn't able to kill Josh earlier. After returning to their room, Mag carefully placed Amy down onto the bed. He looked at Amy's adorable sleeping face, and he couldn't help but lean down to plant a kiss on her forehead. "Alex is back, Rodo is most likely going to be plunged into turmoil soon." Mag chuckled to himself as he looked out the window. "Piss off! Get out!" Josh's robes were soaking wet as he kicked over a servant, who was kneeling on the ground, holding a warm wet towel in his hand. The entire room had been completely wrecked with everything smashed to pieces on the ground, creating a chaotic scene. The dozen or so servants who were kneeling on the ground hurriedly rose to their feet and rushed out the door, thanking their lucky stars that this terrifying ordeal was finally over. The door of the room was closed, and Josh was left alone to his own devices. He stumbled over to the table and slumped into a chair with a pair of soulless eyes. Right at this moment, a burst of blue light illuminated the entire room, and Richard emerged from a teleportation formation. He looked at the distraught Josh with furrowed brows as he said, "Your Highness, Alex has appeared again, and he's returned to the height of his powers. If he reveals what happened 3 years ago to the world, then we'll be faced with immense pressure. We have to make some preparations." Only after hearing Richard's voice did Josh return to his senses a little. His lips were trembling and his face was deathly pale as he said, He wants to kill me. His sword slit my throat, and I almost died." Richard glanced at the gash on Josh's neck with a serious expression as he vowed, "We'll protect you, Your Highness." "No. No one can protect me from his sword." Josh grabbed fistfuls of his own hair and shook his head with a painful expression. All of a sudden, he fell still as a dangerous look appeared in his eyes, and he said in a hoarse and raspy voice, "Unless he dies first." 787 Are you a man or a woman? In the western region of Rodu, in a spacious courtyard, a golden teleportation formation appeared, and Irina slowly emerged from within. A few lamps were immediately lit in the inky black room, following which a few elves emerged with wary expressions. Upon seeing Irina, all of them were rather surprised as they hurriedly extended respectful salutes. "We pay our respects to you, Your Highness." Irina turned toward an elderly elf with white hair and beard as she said, "I have to use the teleportation formation to return to the Wind Forest." The battle outside the Wind Forest was drawing to a conclusion. A massive icy spike had been driven into the chest of the tall and burly demon, pinning him firmly to a tree. At the same time, Sally had copped a blow to the lower abdomen from a stray flying shield, and she fell from her perch up on a tree like a bird with broken wings, landing on the ground with a dull thump. Meanwhile, Blower had a sword protruding from his chest as he stumbled toward Sally, supporting himself using the tree trunks along the way. Blood was pouring out of his chest incessantly, and he was in an extremely feeble state, looking as if he could fall at any moment. However, he still continued to make his way toward Sally in a determined manner. A dozen or so demon and orc bodies were littered all over the ground while their elven captives were huddled together on the ground with their hands and feet bound. All of them wore horrified expressions as they leaned against each other for support, and the children among them were howling with sobs. These elves had endured horrendous torture ever since they had been captured. However, they knew that worse had yet to come. The torment that would be inflicted on them by their own brethren would be much more painful than that inflicted by demons and orcs. However, their group had already reached outskirts of the Wind Forest. How had they been ambushed all of a sudden? They were being detained by none other than their own brethren, so they had given up hope long ago, thinking that no one would come to save them. They're all dead. One of the elves had somehow managed to pluck out the rag in his mouth as he looked around with an astonished expression. All of the elves looked up on hearing this. All of those accursed demons and orcs were lying dead on the ground, and their eyes immediately lit up. Could it be that they're here to save us? All of the elves wore perplexed expressions as they turned their attention to Sally and Blower, one of whom was lying motionlessly on the ground, while the other was moving with great difficulty. If they were elves responsible for facilitating the exchange, then they definitely wouldn't have engaged these demons and orcs in battle, and there was certainly no way that they would have risked their lives to save them with just a party of 2. "You still alive?" Blower panted heavily as he supported himself against a tree, looking down at Sally, who was lying on the ground. Cough. Cough, cough. Sally suddenly began to cough violently before abruptly sitting up and throwing up a mouthful of blood. Only then did she turn her gaze toward Blower in a feeble manner, and asked, "Are you a man or a woman? Is that important right now?" Blower rolled his eyes. However, he was quite relieved to see that Sally seemed to be in a stable condition. As the wave of relief washed over him, his legs refused to hold his weight any longer, and his knees buckled as he sat down on the ground. In doing so, he tweaked the wound on his chest, and even more blood began to flow down his body, causing him to grimace with pain. A ray of green light appeared on Sally's fingertip as she gently rubbed her lower abdomen. The wound inflicted by the shield had stopped bleeding, but her internal injuries wouldn't be healing anytime soon. However, she could still move around as normal. Sally slowly rose to her feet and made her way toward Blower as she said, "If you were a woman, then I wouldn't have to worry about finding a way to cancel our marriage agreement." Blower forced a smile onto his face as he looked up at Sally, and said, "You don't need to worry about that, I don't have any feelings for you." "Good." Sally nodded before closing her fingers around the hilt of the sword protruding from Blower's chest. "What are you doing?" Blower's voice instantly rose a few octaves. "I'm helping you pull it out," Sally replied calmly. "You're going to kill me like this?" A hint of horror flashed through Blower's eyes. Could it be that his words had hurt her and she was taking revenge? "Hey, I actually think you're really a fine woman, it's just that I'm not looking for anyone at the moment, and arg." Before Blower had a chance to finish his sentence, a sharp cry escaped his mouth, scaring away all of the nearby birds. He then looked down to discover that the wound in his chest had been sealed with ice, and was being treated with wisps of green light. "Is she the devil?" Blower's heart fluttered like the wings of a hummingbird as he looked up at the expressionless Sally. Even though he had been saved, he was still struck by a subconscious urge to get far away from her. Not only did she possess brilliant swordsmanship and powerful magic, she was a completely merciless, cold-blooded killer. Sally tossed the blood-stained sword aside and washed her hands by conjuring up a gentle stream of water. She then pulled out a small green box and poured out a green pill, which she handed over to Blower. "If you don't want to be detained like this, then eat this pill and let's go." "All right." Blower accepted the pill and swallowed it before rising to his feet. Even though they had intercepted this group of elven captives just outside the Wind Forest, the battle earlier had caused a massive commotion, and someone would definitely come here to investigate soon. If he were to be detained in female attire, his father would most likely beat him to death. Sally made her way over to elven captives, conjuring up a small blade of ice as she traversed through their ranks, slicing through the vines and ropes that they had been bound with. As she did so, she used a gentle voice to console them, saying, "Don't be scared, we're here to save you all." All of the freed elves pulled the rags out of their mouths and looked down at their wrists, where the residual gashes left behind by the restrictive vines and ropes could still be seen. After a brief period of silence, an elf suddenly burst into sobs, which then quickly set off a widespread chorus of sobs, until almost all of the elves were bawling with all their might. The smile on Sally's face gradually disappeared. As she looked at the sobbing elves, she felt as if her heartstrings were being tugged on violently. She had once thought that the Wind Forest was the most perfect place in this entire world, and that all elves there lived carefree and happy lives. She allowed herself to be served by her family's elven servants, thinking that they were just as happy as she was. Yet now, that image of sunshine and roses had been completely shattered, revealing a hideous and disgusting underbelly. Blower also stood beside Sally with a complex expression, but he still loudly announced, "Get away from here. We have to go as well." The sobs from the elves gradually subsided as they extended grateful bows toward Blower and Sally. They took a glance at the Wind Forest, which they had once regarded as their holy land yet now avoided like the plague, and they began to walk away in the opposite direction. Right at this moment, a sharp voice sounded. "Stop right there! There! 788 who's running their mouth here?" Several dozens of black-robed elves emerged from within the darkness, aiming a series of sharp arrows at Sally and Blower, as well as the elves who had just been freed. Their leader was a middle-aged elf with a set of ordinary features. The elves were predominantly a beautiful race, so this elf stood out as a bit of an outlier. He cast his stern gaze toward the demon and orc bodies strewn all over the ground, and then glanced at the horrified group of elves before finally turning his attention to Blower and Sally. The elf on the left was a little disheveled and her clothes were ragged and dirty, yet her stunning beauty was still quite apparent. However, he didn't recall ever seeing such a beautiful elf of her description. Meanwhile, the elf on the right had a black veil over the lower half of her face, thereby obscuring most of her features. However, her figure and her eyes suggested that she was a fine beauty as well. Among the dead demons and orcs on the ground, there was no lack of beings at the 6th and 7th tiers, yet all of them had been slain, and it appeared that these two young female elves were the perpetrators. Seeing as he had never seen these two elves in the Wind Forest, these two were definitely those so-called elves of freedom. They had a bit of power and they let it get to their heads, prompting them to do something so insolent and reckless. Come to think of it, these two are a pair of fine beauties. If I were to capture them and offer them up to Master Boris, he'd surely be very pleased. Kobold's eyes roamed over Sally and Blower's bodies. It appeared that they had been wounded during the battle, so this was the perfect opportunity to capture them. As such, he waved a hand, and commanded, "Capture them and kill anyone who dares to resist." Expressions of despair appeared on the face of the elves who had just been freed. They looked at the sharp arrows being aimed at them, and they couldn't muster up any urge to resist. They stood rooted to the spot like a wooden statue, waiting to be shackled and enslaved by their own brethren. Kobold's an 8th tier wood-type magic caster, we won't be able to beat him, especially in our current state. I'll hold him to the best of my abilities, you take as many elves away with you as possible, Blower whispered as he looked at Kobold. I'll hold him off, you take the elves and get away from here. Sally had donned a black veil over her face, and she glanced at Blower with a calm expression as she said, "If you get captured like this, news of the third young master of the Baybilly family being a cross-dressing freak will spread through the entire Wind Forest tomorrow. I'm me, not a freak, and I won't change no matter what other people say." Blower looked at Sally as a smile appeared on his face, and he said, "But you are the future hope of the elven race." As soon as his voice trailed off, the seemingly feeble Blower suddenly displayed astonishing speed and power, charging directly toward Kobold with his wand raised. Specks of light began to appear in the air, transforming into wooden arrows that shot forth toward Kobold. "Ha! You dare to attack me?" Kobold looked at Blower with a disdainful expression. He raised a hand, and a heavy wooden shield appeared before him. The wooden arrows thudded into the shield, but couldn't inflict even the slightest amount of damage. Meanwhile, the trees around Blower suddenly seemed to have sprung to life, swinging their branches sweeping toward Blower like wooden whips that were traveling at an astonishing speed. Countless vines also spread from beneath Kobold's feet, extending toward Blower and the other elves. Sally looked at Blower, and a hint of admiration appeared in her eyes for the very first time. She stomped a foot into a nearby tree, sending her shooting through the forest like an agile leopard. She picked up two young elves, one in each arm, before fleeing the scene. "Don't let her get away!" "Fire!" an elf exclaimed, and a rain of arrows came rushing down toward Sally from behind. Sally traversed through the forest rapidly. A series of arrows glanced past her before embedding themselves into the nearby trees, but Sally was slowing down noticeably. The two little elves tucked under her arms were looking up at her with horror in their eyes, but they remained silent and refrained from bursting into sobs. Whoosh! A flaming arrow flew through the air, targeting the little elf under her left arm on this occasion rather than Sally herself. Elves had always been capable hunters and exceptional marksmen, and this arrow was clearly faster and more powerful than the previous ones. It was going for intercept at a point that Sally was inevitably going to have to pass through with unerring accuracy. Sally's expression instantly changed upon seeing this. The archer in question was clearly a veteran hunter who had been waiting for the perfect opportunity before unleashing the most lethal strike. Sally forcibly stopped her advancing footsteps, twisting around in midair to swap positions with that little elf under her left arm. The incoming arrow glanced past her back, leaving a deep gory gash before puncturing 3 trees in rapid succession, and finally coming to a rest after embedding itself into the trunk of a 4th tree. The enormous power momentum imbued within the arrow caused Sally to stumble, and she was immediately brought to a halt. All of their elven assailants surrounded her with light shimmering on the tips of their wands, and there was no lack of 6th and 7th tier magic casters among them. "I'm sorry, I won't be able to get you two out of here today." Sally placed the two little elves gently down on the ground as she drew her wand with tears shimmering in her eyes. The little elven girl gently laid her hand on Sally's and looked up at her with a serious expression as she said, "You killed the baddies that killed my father and mother, thank you, big sister. They killed my grandpa. Thank you, big sister." The little elven boy was also looking up at her with gratitude in his eyes. Sally looked down at the two little elves, and she couldn't hold back her tears any longer as they flowed down her cheeks. Meanwhile, even after evading many branches and using up all of his remaining power to unleash a powerful spell, Blower was still unable to break through Kobol's defenses. In the end, he was bound tightly by a mass of vines and hung upside down from a large tree. All of the other elves had also been bound by vines. None of them struggled, nor did they weep. Their eyes were completely soulless and filled with despair as if they were already dead on the inside. On the other side, Sally erected a magic shield to block one spell after another, but the magic shield was thinning at a rapid rate. In the end, her defenses were breached and she was also bound by vines along with those two little elves. Kobol strode over to them in a high and mighty manner, looking down on all of the detained elves as he announced, "Ever since you were born, you were destined to be inferior to the elves in the Wind Forest. You were always destined to become slaves, and only death awaits you if you dare to resist. There is a hierarchy in this world, and all of you rank at the very bottom." Many of the elves turned to Kobol with hatred and resentment in their eyes, but most of them were already resigned to their fate. In this world, there was no one who could save them. All of the elves in the Wind Forest had already accepted such an arrangement, even the Elven Queen. "Who's running their mouth here?" Right at this moment, a flash of golden light erupted above everyone. An elegant foot descended from the sky, stomping down onto Kobol's face and slamming it into the dirt. The one falling from the sky wasn't an angel, but a beautiful elf instead. Just as all of the captured elves were plunged deep into despair and Sally and Blower had done everything they could, a gorgeous figure descended from above, stomping the high and mighty Kobol into the ground. She was an exquisitely beautiful elf in a white dress with a small golden crescent moon insignia on her forehead. Her entire body was enshrouded in faint golden light, and she was like an ethereal holy goddess descending from the heavens. It was such a breathtakingly beautiful elf who had stomped Kobol's face into the ground. Kobol was an 8th tier wood-type magic caster who had easily subdued Blower and all of the other elves, yet half of his face had been buried in the dirt, and he was unable to move so much as a single inch. Could she be here to save us? In the eyes of all of the captured elves, they felt as if they were witnessing a miracle, and they could barely believe their eyes as a hint of hope welled up in their hearts again. "Your Highness!" Blower's eyes lit up with elation even as he was being hung upside down from a tree. At the same time, his entire body completely relaxed. With her here, everything would be fine. Princess Irina. Sally's eyes were also sparkling as she looked at the elf descending from above, and her teary face lit up with a smile. Within the entire Wind Forest, she was the only one they could trust and rely on, and she had now appeared to save them. The one who had descended from the sky was none other than Irina, who had just returned from Rodu. The teleportation formation in the Elven embassy situated in Rodu required a vast amount of energy from spirit stones to be activated each time, so it was very rarely used. However, someone of Irina's status was obviously granted usage rights by default. "Your Highness!" All of the black-robed elves' hearts jolted with shock upon seeing the new arrival before they hurriedly extended respectful bows toward Irina. All of them lowered their bows and hung their heads with tense expressions on their faces. Not long ago, the princess had emerged from seclusion and killed Elder Schubert on the spot for his slavery of other elves. As a result, the Elven Queen had issued a new order to abolish slavery, and gave all of the enslaved elves a chance to leave the Wind Forest should they so please. However, after that, Princess Irina was locked away in detention, while the Elven Queen also went into seclusion, thus paying no heed to matters within the Elven race. Thus, all of the major families only released some elderly and frail slaves as a show of compliance, but they didn't actually act according to this order. Furthermore, in the period leading up to winter, there would be more and more elves transported back to the wind forest to replenish the ones that had been released, as well as to supply more cannon fodder that could be sent to protect the borders. All of the major families who benefited from slavery were extremely prominent and powerful within the elven race. Thus, even with the example set by Schubert's death, all of them still fell back to their old ways. However, that didn't mean that everyone dared to truly disregard Irina. After all, she had dared to kill Schubert in the presence of the Elven Queen. She was both powerful enough and decisive enough to kill anyone that she wanted, and no major family wanted to make her their enemy. Thus, they decided to have this new batch of enslaved elves transported to the Wind Forest while Irina was away celebrating the king's birthday in the Roth Empire. According to their plan, she should still have been at Rodu at this very moment, and they were horrified to see her appear here. Your Highness! All of the bound elves faltered slightly before legends surrounding Princess Irina suddenly surfaced in their minds. If there was anyone in the Wind Forest who harbored any sympathy for them, then it had to be this kind princess. A few years ago, she and Alex had roamed the continent, destroying countless orc and demon mercenary squads who made their living by capturing wandering elves. Even the few such mercenary squads that remained hurriedly disbanded in fear of being hunted down by Princess Irina. Those years were the safest for all of the elves wandering the Norland continent. No one had to worry about demons and orcs suddenly appearing to capture them. Even though not every wandering elf had been saved by Princess Irina before, all of them were extremely thankful for everything she had done. She was like their savior, rescuing them from an infernal hell. However, good things were never meant to last. 3 years ago, Princess Irina suddenly disappeared, and all of the demons and orcs sprang into action again, capturing wandering elves with reckless abandon. All of the elves who dared to resist were killed, and some of the more beautiful elves were even taken to Rodu or the Demon Islands, and sold to prominent families as sex slaves. However, most of them were transported back to the Wind Forest and reduced to lowly slaves. This was a never-ending disaster. Aside from a small portion of powerful elves who could escape this horrible fate, almost all of the elves wandering the Norland continent became victims of this cruel practice. Chaos City became the final haven for free elves, but elves had begun disappearing from Chaos City as well as of late. The wandering elves were powerless to resist this horrific disaster, so they could only pin their hopes on Princess Irina. It was just that during her 3-year seclusion, she seemed to have been completely wiped off the face of the continent, and all of the wandering elves were eventually cast into despair. But now, Princess Irina had appeared once again, and she had just stomped the elf who had attacked them into the ground like a cockroach. All of the despairing elves were filled with hope once again. If there was anyone in this world who could save them from the Wind Forest, then it was Princess Irina. All elves were born equal. What is this nonsense about a hierarchy? Irina cast her gaze at all of the elves around her before looking down at Kobyl with a cold expression as she demanded, Her Majesty abolished slavery a month ago, how dare you continue to engage in such heinous practices behind her back? Your Highness! We're only doing as we were told. Order Diff told us to do this. Kobyl's horrified face was half buried in the dirt as he gave a reply with difficulty. Even Elder Schubert had been slain by Irina without a second thought, so it wouldn't be a surprise at all if she were to kill him here. He had only enjoyed half of the lengthy lifespan that elves were endowed with, and he didn't want to die yet. All right, I'll be going after him next. Irina nodded with a cold expression before raising her right foot and stomping it down again. Kobyl's head was completely crushed into the soil amid a thickening crunch, and his body spasmed momentarily before falling completely still. Back when I was traveling the continent, I had thought that the elves of the Wind Forest were my brethren, so at the very least, they wouldn't be as shameless and heinous as the orcs and demons. Irina lifted her foot from Kobyl's head as she looked around at the horrified black-robed elves. However, I soon found out that I was wrong. Compared to them, All of you are more like demons. 790 I thought she would spend the night here. She's back. Within the starry cave, Helena cast her gaze in the northwestern direction with a hint of surprise in her eyes. However, she also heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. A thought then seemed to have occurred to her as she shook her head and murmured to herself, "Those useless idiots. I'm so glad you're safe, Irina." The Elven Queen smiled as she stood at the tip of the tallest tree in the wind forest. She cast her gaze toward the northwest, and her smile gradually disappeared. Perhaps it's time to give her free rein and truly allow her to do something. Perhaps I really was wrong. The Elven Queen stood on top of the tree for a long while before withdrawing her gaze and slowly making her way downward, finally disappearing into the hollow in the tree. Irina's back. At the same time, there were some elves who had sensed the magic waves outside the wind forest, and they could already guess who had just returned. Many of them knew of the transaction that was about to take place just outside the wind forest today. They had thought that Irina would remain in Rodua forever, but she had returned to the wind forest, and that had undoubtedly given them a massive surprise. Within the darkness, there were already many elves gathering together. All of the black-robed elves with bows in their hands had hung their heads in horror and shame, not daring to meet Irina's gaze. "Please spare us, Your Highness. We're only following orders," an elf suddenly threw his bow onto the ground before falling onto his knees. "Please spare us, Your Highness." Dull thumps rang out one after another as all of the elves fell to their knees with fearful expressions. Irina swept her gaze over these elves before withdrawing the vines that had bound all of the captured elves. She then directed those vines toward the black-robed elves kneeling on the ground and hung them from the trees instead. All of the elves who had regained their freedom for the second time in one night all sat down on the ground as if all of the energy had been sapped from their bodies. They looked at the dead kobold, then up at the elven warrior who had been bound and hung down from vines, and they felt as if they were dreaming. "I'm Irina." Irina gave a simple self-introduction as she made her way over to the wounded and shell-shocked elves. A hint of sympathy appeared in her eyes as she gently raised a hand. A ray of green light surged over from the tree of life in the distance, swirling around her body before flowing toward the group of elves before her. The green light gently caressed the wounds on their bodies, quickly healing them with its tremendous life force energy. Their injuries quickly regenerated while color returned to their pale cheeks, and the soul also seemed to have returned to their eyes. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, the broken elves were healed both on the inside and the outside, and it was as if they had received a new lease on life. "Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you." The elves were all filled with elation as they looked at their restored bodies. All of them sobbed with elation as they extended grateful bows toward Irina. The two little elves in Sally's arms had also regained a healthy complexion as they landed on the ground, extending their little hands to try and help Sally to her feet. Both of them wore joyful smiles on their little faces as they said, "Big sister, Her Highness is here to save us." "Indeed, Her Highness has saved us." Sally nodded as she looked at Irina with admiration in her eyes. "In the future, I want to become an elf just like her, fighting for the elven race with everything I have." Can you guys get me down from here?" Blower asked in a slightly awkward voice. Even though he had also received treatment, he was still hanging upside down from a tree, which was understandably quite uncomfortable. Sally raised a finger to summon a blade of ice, which sliced open the vines around Blower's body, causing him to fall straight to the ground. Just as he was about to land headfirst into the dirt, he twisted around so his knees could cushion his fall, and he knelt down in front of Irina in the end. "No need to thank me, I was only doing my job." Irina shook her head before turning her attention toward Blower and Sally, upon which she gave a slight nod of approval, and said, "Get away from here. Go to Chaos City, that's the only safe place right now. Someone will take you there, and no one will hunt you down anymore." Blower rose to his feet in a rather awkward manner before rubbing his knee with a grimace of pain. He glanced at Irina before yelling to everyone else, "Come with me, everyone, I'll take you all to Chaos City." All of the elves extended another collective grateful bow toward Irina before following Blower toward the south. Chaos City was an unfamiliar place to them, but it was indeed their final haven. At the very least, no mercenary squad dared to blatantly hunt elves there. Sally turned to Irina and opened her mouth to say something, but she suppressed the urge to do so in the end. After taking one final glance at Irina, she hurriedly rushed over to catch up with Blower. Irina's promise meant that these elves would definitely be taken safely to Chaos City. She promised that no one was going to hunt them down, so no one would dare to try and hunt them. The group of several dozens of elves traversed through the night with Blower leading the way, holding a flaming torch that illuminated the way ahead. All of the elves' eyes were filled with renewed hope. It was as if they had finally found a path in the darkness that led toward the light. Irina looked on as the flaming torch disappeared into the distance before turning toward the wind forest, standing on the spot in silence. The entire wind forest was completely silent, as if no one was aware of what had just taken place. On that night, countless people on the Norland continent suffered sleepless nights. However, Mag had a very good night's sleep. As soon as he opened his eyes, he was greeted by the sight of the bright morning sun, and it was as if the storm from the night before was nothing more than a distant dream. He took a glance at Amy, who was sleeping soundly using her arms as a pillow, and a smile appeared on his face. As long as he could wake up to Amy's smiling face every day, then everything would be all right. When Amy finally woke up of her own accord, Mag got out of bed and helped her into a beautiful little white dress. "Where's Irina, father? Has she already left?" Amy looked around with disappointment on her little face. "She did. She left after you fell asleep last night, but we'll definitely meet her again." Mag patted Amy's little head with a smile. "I thought she'd spend the night here." Amy sighed before looking up at Mag with a disappointed expression, and scolded, "Father, why didn't you take this opportunity?" Mag's expression instantly darkened. Just what was in that little head of hers? Was she that eager for her birth parents to get together? "All right, we have to go and participate in the numerical system debate today. Teacher Luna is still waiting for us." Mag changed the subject as he picked up Amy's little hand, and led her out the door. "When will we be able to see big sister Irina again, father?" Amy asked. Mag paused in his footsteps and looked down at Amy with a serious expression as he replied, "In a year at most." 791 Should we have noodles or rice for breakfast? A brand new day had dawned on Rodu. Due to the return of Alex, many people were beginning to reassess the situation. Even though not many details had been revealed about the battle that had taken place the night before, the coincidental appearance of the second prince on the scene drew a lot of suspicions. Back when news of Alex's assassination had first spread 3 years ago, the king himself had made a public announcement of the cause of Alex's death, executing a few orcs and demons as a result. However, there were still some conspiracy theorists who were convinced that foul play was involved, and that Josh was actually the one who had orchestrated the assassination. Josh just so happened to have appeared in the battle that had taken place the previous night, and there were even rumors that he had faced Alex in battle. This information suddenly made the conspiracies surrounding Josh seem not so implausible after all. There had always been a delicate balance maintained between Josh and Sean. As long as the king refrained from choosing an heir, the balance would continue to exist, and everything would appear to be quite tranquil and peaceful. However, Alex's return was like a sledgehammer that brutally shattered this frail balance. With his enormous power and his position in the hearts of the citizens of the Roth Empire, his choice would undoubtedly be capable of tipping the scales. Even the king himself couldn't simply ignore his opinion. Regardless of whether Josh was involved in the assassination 3 years ago, most people were of the opinion that Alex wouldn't choose to side with Josh following his return. He had endured battles of life and death on the Empire's borders with Sean as his comrade, so the first prince was clearly the better choice. Following Alex's passing, the first prince had mourned and fasted for Alex for 3 days and 3 nights, that was a clear indication of the close bond that they had shared. All of the officials who had already made their choices were considering whether they had made the wrong decision, while some of the fence-sitters were also being tempted to pick a side. The storm that had taken place the night before had shaken the entire Roth Empire. Of course, some people were completely unaffected by this incident. These people included the normal citizens of the city, as well as the scholars who were heading toward Carlow Church in an excited manner. Carlow Church was situated in the western region of Rodau on a vast plot of land that had been cordoned off using black railing. At the center of a yellowing lawn stood a grand round-domed church, beside which were 2 rows of large white stone pillars. There was a plaza that had been paved with slabs of white stone in front of the church, and white pigeons were searching for grass seeds in the gaps between the stone slabs. The black-robed priests wore serious expressions as they traversed through the long corridors of the church. There was no hint of a smile on their faces whatsoever, and all of them seemed to be in a hurry. The church had a longer history than even the Roth Empire. During the War Among Species, priests had roamed the entire Norland continent, administering treatment to the humans who had been wounded during the war, and fostering the children who had lost their parents to battle. As such, they were deeply respected and revered by the masses. Furthermore, the Church also played an imperative role in uniting the humans during the War Among Species. It was through a common faith that everyone banded together, and the Church had developed many exceptional knights and magic casters for the human race. The royal family of the Roth Empire at the time were the spokespeople for the Church. They led the humans during the war and ensured the survival of the entire human race, securing a vast territory in the process. However, following the founding of the Roth Empire, all of the past kings had been trying to lessen the influence and the power of the Church. This trend was especially apparent during the several decades when Andrei had been in power. From the many churches that had once stood all over the Roth Empire, this Carlow Church was now the only one that remained. Most of the church's influence had been absorbed by the Magus Tower, and the people who had been part of the War Among Species had all passed away. As such, this century-old church was now merely a symbolic existence, marking a chapter in the history of the human race. Even though the church was still supposedly respected by the royal family, it was heavily restricted and essentially no longer had any power. The cavernous Carlow Church had even been reduced to a venue for some officials when holding major events, such as this debate. All of the elderly priests naturally weren't responsible for attending to such matters, and all of them stayed in the back rooms, reminiscing about the good old glory days. Even though the church had been steadily on the wane, it was still not a place that could be defiled by anyone. The Roth Empire's Department of Education was only allowed access to the main hall of the church, and they were prohibited from accessing any other areas. The young priests wore serious expressions as they poured tea for the white-robed elders before standing off to the side with their hands clasped behind their backs. Even though they didn't like these people for being so boisterous and noisy in the church, they had to force themselves to serve them, so it was no wonder that their expressions were rather sour. The main hall of the church was paved with marble that was glistening with a faint golden sheen, and natural light was passing through the clear crystal dome up above, illuminating the entire hall. There were beautiful pieces of art carved on the stone walls within the church, all of which were images depicting the members of the church lending their assistance to the human warriors during the War Among Species. During those chaotic and tumultuous times, it was none other than the priests who led the humans out of the darkness, allowing them to finally become a force to be reckoned with on the Norland continent. There were currently hundreds of white-robed and azure-robed people sitting cross-legged before the pieces of wall art. Some of them were quite old and wizened, while others seemed to have barely graduated out of their teens. There were clearly less azure-robed figures among them, and the people were also quite a bit younger than the average age of the people present. Meanwhile, there were 10 people who were also seated cross-legged on the tall platform. Half of them wore white robes, while the other half were in azure robes, and they were sitting on either side of the platform with a clear division between them. The white-robed figures were all elderly men with white hair. In contrast, among the azure-robed figures, aside from Byron, who sat at the center, all of the other 4 weren't even middle-aged yet, so their group appeared to be far more youthful. All of the azure-robed figures present wore rather nervous expressions as they glanced at Byron from time to time. This was going to be the final one of 10 debates, and the result of this debate would decide whether they would adopt the new numerical system or stay with the old hexadecimal system. During the previous 9 debates, the trend was that more and more people were joining the azure-robed camp. However, there were still more conservative and stubborn white-robed, and it was very difficult to counter their arguments surrounding tradition and inheritance. If they were to lose this debate, then all of their past efforts would go to waste. The multiplication table that they were hoping to popularize would also be buried in the sands of time. This was something that no one wanted to see. A black-robed middle-aged man made his way toward Byron, and said, "Master Byron, it's 9 a.m. We should begin the debate now. Why isn't Mr. Mag here yet?" Luna was standing at the entrance to the hall, casting her gaze into the distance with an urgent expression on her face. Byron also glanced at the entrance before withdrawing his gaze as he nodded, and said, "Let's begin." On a certain food street, Amy looked up at Mag, and asked, "Father, should we have noodles or rice for breakfast?" As soon as 9 a.m. arrived, the debate commenced. This debate had already been raging for 2 months, and it became very heated right away. The man sitting at the center of the conservative white-robed had a large black mole on his glabella. His name was Irma, and he wore a disdainful look on his face as he said in a haughty manner, "The hexadecimal system is something left to us by our ancestors. It is the manifestation of the wisdom of our forefathers. During our history of thousands of years, it has played an extremely important role, and it's not an exaggeration to say that it's an imperative part of human society. For this system, countless mathematicians worked and researched tirelessly to enrich themselves and expand this field. It's the brightest star in the history of the human race, and the result of countless blood, sweat, and tears shed by those who lived before us." All of the conservatives nodded in agreement, and Irma's disdain was mirrored in their eyes as they looked at the revolutionary azure robes. These people had somehow been swayed by Byron to try and revolutionize the numerical system, and it was ridiculous that they were making such a big deal out of this farcical matter. The decimal system was only used in the Roth Empire when applied to currency, and all of the scholars in the field of mathematics had always looked down on it, thinking that it was an inferior numerical system that wasn't worth researching. If it weren't for the fact that they were trying to make the currency system easier to understand for the general public, the decimal system wouldn't even exist in the Roth Empire. Byron was the Deputy Minister of the Department of Education, and he was the highest-ranking figure among everyone gathered here. However, even with his lofty status, it was still quite difficult for him to try and implement this revolutionary new system, and that was an indication of just how deeply rooted the hexadecimal system was in the field of mathematics in the Roth Empire. This event had become the laughingstock among the scholars of the Roth Empire of late. Master Byron was an extremely esteemed figure in the field of mathematics, and was close to retirement age, but he was getting involved in such a massive farce. His entire career would most likely be blighted by this foolish decision. The youngest scholar among the revolutionaries, going by the name of Lister, vehemently countered, "The decimal system is far simpler and more efficient than the hexadecimal system. If we were to implement it in conjunction with the Mamie multiplication table, we'll be countless times more efficient when making calculations. It has so many distinct advantages over the hexadecimal system, and widespread implementation would significantly increase the general IQ of the entire population. We'll be paving the way to a future where even common citizens can make calculations for themselves." Commoners? Hat. The portly Leroy sitting beside Irma pursed his fat lips with disdain, and said, "Arithmetics is an art, not something for those lowly and ignorant commoners to dabble in. It is an exclusive art form passed down between nobles. Those lowly commoners should just do what they're told. And who gave you permission to raise the IQ of the general public? The more those idiotic commoners know, the more ideas they'll have, and that's not a good thing." Lister's expression changed as he slowly clenched his fists. He was born in a noble family that had already fallen from grace, and he had been accepted into Bauhinia Academy for his prodigious talent in the field of mathematics. At the age of 30, he had already become the youngest professor in the academy. During his youth, his gambling addict grandfather had lost the entire estate, so he had to live among the commoners with his parents in the northern region of the city. As such, he lived a life that was no different from that of commoners, and he still had many commoners as friends. As such, commoners were not lowly beings in his eyes. However, the current caste stunted their potential for growth, barring them from the academies that were exclusive to nobles, thereby cutting off their only avenue to accumulate knowledge. It was just as Leroy had said, the commoners could only do as they were told, while the nobles received the best education and became the elites of society. In contrast, the commoners had no right to access education, and could only live in ignorance for generation after generation. Lister also knew that all of the commoners had to work hard every day just to fill their stomachs. They had no spare time nor money to receive education in order to better themselves. However, if the decimal system could replace the hexadecimal system and be widely implemented along with the Mamie multiplication table, then even commoners would quickly be able to grasp basic arithmetics. That would be enough for them in everyday life. A quantitative change of a large enough degree would inevitably result in a qualitative change. Once enough commoners grasped the decimal system, the entire human race would advance, taking a huge step forward. Mathematics wasn't some kind of so-called artistic endeavor. Instead, it was a tool that had been invented for use in daily life. However, he simply couldn't convince these stubborn masters who held extremely high positions in the world of scholars within the Roth Empire. Byron looked at Leroy with a serious expression, and said, "What we're doing is not educating the ignorant masses. Educational exclusivity for the nobles has been in place for many years, and the next step for us is to choose some talented children among the commoners and give them an education, making them become the pillars of our Roth Empire. Commoners all have ignorant blood running through their bodies, so they won't become pillars of our empire even if they do receive an education. Our mathematical committee has already voted yesterday, and over 90% of our members have voted against the implementation of the decimal system. That is our final stance on the matter. Besides, you expect us to implement an untested multiplication table proposed by some random person? If we overthrow the hexadecimal system that we've used for thousands of years in preference of something so ridiculous farcical, we'd become the laughingstock of the entire continent. You'll be ruining the field of mathematics in the Roth Empire. Can you shoulder the blame for such a massive travesty?" The white-robed Ulton chuckled coldly. The revolutionaries fell silent upon hearing this, and everyone turned their eyes to Byron. Only Byron could shoulder such a heavy burden, so he was the only one who could rise to the occasion. Luna was wringing her hands together with an urgent expression as she looked at Byron. Ulton had dug a massive pit for Byron, and he was going to lose regardless of whether he jumped into the pit or not. All of the conservatives wore confident smiles on their faces, seemingly having already anticipated this result. "Sorry, am I late?" Right at this moment, the doors of the hall were suddenly pushed open from the outside. A young man strode in, holding the hand of an adorable little half-elf girl, who was, in turn, holding a little orange kitten. 793 Uneducated chef. The debate had already reached a state where a verdict was about to be reached. No one dared to answer the sharp question raised by Ulton, and if the revolutionaries had no response, then this debate would conclude with the victory going to the conservatives. However, right at this moment, someone suddenly arrived at the venue. Everyone turned their attention to this strange combination, which consisted of a young man with a little half-elf girl, as well as an orange kitten. They appeared to have nothing to do with this debate, so everyone was perplexed why they had come here. "Who's that?" Ulton appraised Mag with a cold expression. If this debate could conclude due to a question raised by him, then his status in the world of scholars would most definitely be enhanced further. As such, he was naturally rather displeased to be interrupted on the cusp of glory. "Isn't he that chef from yesterday's royal banquet?" Irma faltered slightly upon seeing Mag and Amy. He had attended the birthday banquet the day before, so he could naturally recall this duo. However, he hadn't thought that he would see them again today. Could it be that meals were to be served during the debate, and he'd been invited here to cook for everyone? Exactly, why did he come here rather than stay in the palace and cook for His Majesty? Leroy frowned as he looked at Mag. All of the revolutionaries were also just as confused. Aside from Byron, none of them even knew who Mag was. Teacher Luna. Amy waved at Luna before adjusting Ugly Duckling's position as it was about to slide down out of her arms. Amy, Mr. Mag. A smile appeared on Luna's nervous face. Even though they were late, it was very much a case of better late than never. Sorry, we got a little delayed on the way here. Mag nodded in an apologetic manner. He hadn't cooked breakfast earlier, and it had been rather difficult to choose what to eat, so they ended up arriving at the venue later than expected. Right this way, please, Mr. Mag, Byron said with a smile as he rose to his feet. Sure. Mag left Amy with Luna before making his way over to Byron. Ulton was a little displeased. What are you doing, Master Byron? The debate is still in progress, how can we allow an unrelated outsider to interrupt us? Even more so, he's just an illiterate chef. Could it be that you're trying to get a chef to help you in this debate? All of the conservatives burst into raucous laughter as they looked at Mag with disdain in their eyes. If a chef was proficient in the field of mathematics, then wouldn't that make them the same as lowly chefs? That would be preposterous. Not only is Mr. Mag the chef who received the Best Dish Award during the royal banquet, he was also the one who proposed the Mamie multiplication table, and it's none other than his brilliant contribution that has made arithmetics so simple to popularize. As such, he has every right to participate in this debate today. Byron turned toward Mag with approval in his eyes, and asked, how can you call him an unrelated outsider? Who among us has more right than him to be here? He is our sixth speaker during this debate. He's the one who proposed the Mamie multiplication table. Lister's eyes immediately lit up upon hearing this. The simple yet efficient multiplication table was imbued with astonishing wisdom and intelligence. In Lister's heart, the one who'd proposed such a brilliant tool surely had to be an old and wise scholar. Who would have thought that it would actually be a man who appeared to be comparable to himself in age? All of the other revolutionaries were also astonished to hear this. If it weren't for the fact that they had been won over by the brilliant Mamie multiplication table, they wouldn't have chosen to jump ship and throw their support behind the decimal system so quickly. After all, no one wanted to become a rebel if they could avoid it. As such, all of them were stunned by the fact that such a young man had proposed the revolutionary multiplication table. On top of that, he was also a chef. The glowing praise Byron had delivered immediately made everyone reassess Mag. His ability to win the Best Dish Award during the royal banquet already indicated that he stood at the pinnacle of the cooking world. How could a cooking genius like him also be a brilliant mathematician? Ulton looked at Mag with a deriding sneer, and scoffed, no wonder the so-called multiplication table is so crude and unsightly, turns out it was invented by a chef. I underestimated the multiplication table. If I'd known that it was something proposed by a lowly chef, I would have never participated in this debate. All of the conservatives also wore expressions of disdain and superiority. All of them hailed from noble families, and the fact that they were scholars placed them on a pedestal above even normal noblemen, let alone a lowly chef. Even the revolutionaries were starting to lose their confidence. Byron hadn't revealed any information about Mag to them this entire time. As such, they hadn't even been aware of his age, let alone his profession. To scholars like them, it was naturally a little absurd that they were fighting so hard for a multiplication table proposed by a chef. Simplicity is the basis for popularity. It is the priority for basic education, and it determines whether it's easily replicable and has the potential to become prevalently utilized. Mag turned to Ulton with a smile, and said, basic arithmetics is supposed to be a practical skill, not some profound art. It's an absolute joke that all of you are trying to overcomplicate skills that can be mastered even by children barely out of their infancy. All of you are desperately nursing your frail egos and trying to create an artificial pedestal for yourselves so you can continue to feel superior to everyone else. However, that pedestal is going to be destroyed by the decimal system and the multiplication table. Mag cast his gaze toward the 5 white-robed elderly men on stage with a disdainful sneer, and continued, "That's why you're scared. You're petrified that those ignorant commoners will one day be able to easily calculate answers to questions that you have to work painstakingly to answer. It doesn't feel good to have your fragile egos come under threat, does it?" All of the conservatives' expressions changed in unison. Mag's words were like sharp blades digging under their skin, making them feel very uncomfortable. Change was indeed something that evoked fear and unrest among people. Fear of the unknown made the conservatives wary, and they would much rather stay in their own comfort zones. As such, regardless of how superior this decimal system was, they were insistent on denying it its place under the sun so they could continue to be looked up to by the masses. In contrast, all of the revolutionaries' eyes immediately lit up. During the entire course of this debate, they had constantly been bullied by the conservatives. All 5 of the white-robed elderly men were extremely esteemed scholars, so no one dared to directly rebuke them. However, Mag had no such qualms, and his scathing tirade was extremely satisfying to all of the green-robed revolutionaries. Ulton was so enraged that his beard was trembling as he pointed at Mag. You. That's utter nonsense. If a child can calculate multiplication problems with 2-digit numbers, I'll retire right away. However, if you're simply spouting nonsense, then I'm going to reveal to this entire world that your multiplication table is nothing more than a pile of trash. The atmosphere in the hall immediately became quite tense. Ulton was an extremely esteemed figure in the field of mathematics here in the Roth Empire, and his position was only below that of Irma and Leroy. Setting official titles aside and speaking from a scholarly perspective alone, even Byron ranked below him. He was now threatening retirement and putting his entire career on the line to crush Mag, and that was a clear indication of his confidence. Even though Mag's words were quite sharp, upon careful analysis, they appeared to be quite exaggerated. After all, could a child that was barely out of their infancy really be able to win against the best mathematicians of the Roth Empire? Ulton's actions seemed to be quite rash and reckless, but he was actually taking a calculated risk. 2-digit multiplication problems were considered to be extremely difficult in the world of mathematics. If the problem involved large numbers, then no ordinary mathematician would be able to solve it. In fact, there were many people present who were unable to solve such questions. However, Mag was proclaiming that even a child was capable of such an extraordinary feat, and that was clearly nothing more than a pipe dream. Now, Ulton was grabbing a hold of that point and issuing a challenge that Mag clearly couldn't win. The revolutionaries were all waiting for Mag's response. The notion had been raised by Mag, and it was time for him to support it. If Mag didn't accept the challenge, then the verdict of this debate was quite apparent. However, if Mag were to accept the challenge, where was he going to find such a prodigious young mathematician? Could it be? Luna withdrew her gaze from Mag and turned toward Amy, who was currently struggling to hold Ugly Duckling in her arms. Was Amy going to be the one to prove Mag's point? What a touching bet! If all of you were so eager to retire and refrain from continuing to burden the field of mathematics, it would be vastly fortunate for the entire Roth Empire, Mag said with a smile. A bet like this played right into his hands. Looking at the enraged expressions on the faces of all of the white-robed dogmatic old farts, Mag's smile widened even further. Seeing as you're so eager to volunteer yourself as tribute, let me show you the power of the multiplication table used in conjunction with the decimal system. My 4-year-old daughter will be the one to demonstrate this point for me. Mag gestured toward Amy, who then skipped over to him with Ugly Duckling in her arms. Mag continued, you can pick the best mathematician among you and assign the same 2-digit multiplication problem to both competitors. Of course, the mathematician chosen by your side must use the hexadecimal system in their calculations. The winner of this showdown will decide who wins this debate. If you lose, then you have no right to further obstruct the implementation of the decimal system and the multiplication table in the Roth Empire. The entire hall had fallen completely silent. No one had expected Mag to accept the challenge. Furthermore, he was upping the stakes, and proposing that the outcome of this contest decided the outcome of the entire debate. What was even more arrogant of him was that he was allowing anyone from the Conservatives to go up against Amy, which meant that even Irma or Alton could take the stage. Everyone immediately turned to Amy, only to discover a little girl who appeared to be around 3 or 4 years of age. Her semi-transparent pointy little ears and her intricate little face were all very adorable, and as she blinked her large blue eyes in an innocent manner, she didn't look like she was capable of even simple arithmetic calculations. Little girls her age were normally still fretting about what they were going to eat. How could she have possibly mastered the skill to solve 2-digit multiplication problems? All of the revolutionaries were also feeling quite nervous. Even though they had chosen an extremely difficult path from the very beginning, all of them had been working their hardest during the past few months. However, Mag was now proposing a downright absurd contest, and if he were to lose, they would also lose the debate. In that case, all of their efforts would completely go down the drain. Everyone turned toward Byron in unison. He was the leader of this mathematical revolution, and only he could decide whether this showdown would go ahead. Byron looked at Mag for a moment, and then cast his gaze toward Amy. A smile appeared on his face as he nodded, and said, "I have no objections to this." Alton, Irma, and Leroy glanced at each other before Alton turned to Mag with a cold sneer on his face. "All right, I'll be happy to crush your insolence." Irma turned to a young man with a heavily freckled face below the stage, and said, "Fitch, you can compete against her." "He's sending out Fitch. That shouldn't be allowed." All of the revolutionaries immediately sagged like deflated balloons. Fitch was the most exceptional young student of the elite Imperial Academy of Mathematics, and had been a prodigy from a young age. At just 10 years of age, he solved a 2-digit multiplication problem on his own, and was accepted into the academy as Irma's disciple. Now, he was still only 16 years old, but his reputation had already exceeded that of many of his teachers, and no one could compete with him when it came to speed solving. Even Irma had proclaimed that Fitch would reach greater heights than he had during his peak. Such a brilliant prodigy was being sent out to compete with a little 3-year-old half-elf girl. It appeared that the Conservatives were willing to become laughingstocks as long as they could win this debate. "Yes." The young man emerged from within the crowd before slowly making his way onto the tall platform. Without his freckles, he would actually be quite a handsome young man. Even though he was a little thin and frail, he carried himself in a graceful manner, and there was no hint of arrogance about him that one would expect from a prodigy of his lofty status. Instead, he gave off an air of benevolence, and seemed to be quite approachable. Mag glanced at the young man with absolute confidence in his eyes. These stupid old bastards dared to proclaim that the multiplication table was crude and unsightly. It was time for them to learn their place. "My daughter, Amy, will be participating in this contest. She's 4 years old at the moment." Mag patted Amy's head before turning toward the Conservatives as he continued, "In a contest of calculation, the best parameter to decide on a winner would naturally be speed. We'll each pick a random 2-digit number to be used as components for the multiplication problem, and we'll see who can get the answer first. The final answers can be converted into the other contestants' numerical system for verification purposes. For some reason, the author says she's 3 in the chapters as of late, but she'd been introduced as either 4 or nearly 4 at the start. The rules were very simple, and the fact that each side was picking a random number made the contest quite fair. Furthermore, a contest of speed was the most direct and straightforward way to decide a winner. However, the adorable Amy created a stark contrast with the prodigious Fitch. Even if Fitch were to secure victory in this contest, it wouldn't do much to enhance his reputation. Instead, it would actually be rather embarrassing for him regardless of whether he won or not. The rules had been proposed by Mag, and he was using his own daughter to prove his point. In response, Irma was sending out his disciple, Fitch, to compete in his stead. If Irma were to take the stage and compete against a little 4-year-old girl, he would truly become the joke of the entire scholarly world regardless of the outcome. Irma looked at Byron, and solemnly said, "Seeing as everything has been decided, let's begin the contest." This debate of numerical systems had been raging on for far too long. Even though they currently still had the situation under control, those revolutionaries were gaining more and more traction, and more people were becoming interested in the decimal system as well as the so-called Mamie multiplication table. That was not good news for them, so they had to end this farce as quickly as possible. If they could prove that Mag, who had proposed the multiplication table in the first place, was nothing but a scam artist, then the wind would undoubtedly be completely taken out of the revolutionaries' sails. Byron turned to Mag to gather his opinion. Mag nodded in response, so Byron replied, "All right, let's begin." Mag leaned down with a smile, and said to Amy, "Amy, you have to go and solve a multiplication problem now. Just use the method that I taught you, then yell out the answer loudly as soon as you solve it." "All right, I'll win for sure." Amy nodded confidently. She had been doing multiplication problems for half an hour every day under Mag's tutelage during this recent period of time. "She's just a little brat who's barely learned how to walk. You're telling me she can solve a 2-digit multiplication problem? What a joke!" Ulton pursed his lips with disdain as he looked at Amy. He had absolute confidence in winning this bet. After all, Fitch's speed-solving skills were quite extraordinary even to him. Furthermore, this boy had limitless potential, and as long as he continued to be obedient, the Conservatives would push him to even greater heights. "I'm Fitch." Fitch made his way over to Amy and bent down slightly before offering his hand in a gentlemanly manner. "I'm Amy." Amy looked up at Fitch, and also extended a little hand of her own. However, her hand was grabbed by a larger hand midway. Mag gently tucked Amy's little hand down by her side before looking at Fitch with a smile. "I think this is going to be an interesting contest. Because you'll be losing to an opponent called Amy," Amy added with a serious expression. Fitch stood up straight again with a smile, and replied, "I always look forward to interesting contests, but I've never come up against an opponent who could push me." A middle-aged man strode forward as the MC, and loudly announced, "Both contestants will be given the same problem comprising of a multiplication problem with 2 numbers, each of which will be picked out by each side. Once the answers have been derived, they'll be converted into decimal and hexadecimal forms for cross-referencing purposes. The one who gets the correct answer first will be the winner." Someone had already carried tables, chairs, paper, and quills over to Amy and Fitch, both of who were sitting with a distance of around 3 meters between them with their backs facing each other. Amy gently placed Ugly Duckling onto the table, and whispered, "Don't go anywhere or make a fuss, Ugly Duckling, I'll be done soon. Otherwise, I'm going to eat you." Meow. Ugly Duckling lay down obediently on the table, and didn't dare to move even a single whisker. Fitch sat down at his table with a calm expression. Just his presence alone seemed to carry a calming quality, and with him participating in the contest, it appeared that victory was assured for the Conservatives. Mag also received a quill and a piece of paper. After a brief period of contemplation, he wrote down the number 56 before handing the piece of paper to the MC. Irma did the same thing at almost the exact same moment. Soon, both numbers were converted into decimal and hexadecimal forms before being given to Amy and Fitch, and the contest officially commenced. Amy looked at the 2 numbers on her sheet of paper with a blank expression as if she had been completely shell-shocked, not even picking up her quill. Meanwhile, Fitch picked up his quill as soon as the numbers were revealed to him before scribbling up a series of complex formulae and equations that were extremely difficult to follow. Irma looked at the 2 of them with a confident smile on his face. With Fitch's abilities, it would take him no more than an hour to solve this question. By then, that little girl would have most likely given up and fallen asleep already. "She's not even picking up her quill, is she conceding her loss already? What a shameless bastard that man is," getting his daughter to take the fall for him. All of the conservatives heaved sighs of relief. They'd initially been a little worried that Mag had educated a brilliant prodigy, but it appeared that their concerns were completely unnecessary. There was most likely no one in this world more proficient in speed solving than Fitch. Even if there was someone like that, it definitely wouldn't be this little 4-year-old half-elf girl. Why isn't she picking up her quill? The revolutionaries were also growing rather flustered. Their hearts had already leaped to their throats when Mag thrust his daughter into this contest, and now, it appeared that their worst fears were going to be realized. This little girl was clearly throwing the match. Has Amy mastered 2-digit multiplication already? Luna was also looking at Amy with a nervous expression. Even for her, it would take at least a day to solve a 2-digit multiplication problem using the hexadecimal system. 3 months ago, Amy couldn't even remember any numbers. How was it possible that she had mastered such a profound and difficult skill so quickly? Luna turned her gaze toward Mag, and all of her concerns were immediately quelled at the sight of the confident smile on his face. 3 months ago, Amy couldn't even count numbers properly, but she mastered 1-digit multiplication in just 2 months. With Mr. Mag here, nothing is impossible. With that in mind, Luna felt a lot more assured. The entire hall was completely silent aside from the scratching of Fitch's feather quill. Time seemed to have slowed down, thereby further exacerbating the nervous energy in the air. Less than half a minute had passed when Amy suddenly murmured to herself, 16*56 equals 896. That's my answer, 896. She then picked up her quill for the very first time, and carefully wrote down those 3 numbers. She put down her quill and picked up Ugly Duckling as she smiled, and announced, I've got the answer, you've already lost. How is that possible? The entire hall burst into an uproar as everyone looked on with incredulity at the elated Amy, as well as the stack of untouched paper on the table. During this short span of time, Amy hadn't touched her quill even once, and when she finally did pick it up, it was only so she could write down her answer. That was simply incredible to everyone. Some of the scholars present had researched calculating 2-digit multiplication problems using the decimal system. However, they wouldn't be able to solve such a question in half an hour, let alone half a minute. Fitch was scribbling furiously on the sheet of paper before him when his quill suddenly faltered. He turned back to look at the beaming Amy with a hint of surprise on his face. Luna's eyes widened as she stared at Amy with disbelief in her eyes. Not only had Amy actually solved the question, she had done so in what felt like the blink of an eye. Amy was a child who would never lie, and Mag had a propensity of constantly creating miracles. As such, she was almost blindly confident that Amy had calculated the correct answer. After all, no matter how implausible or absurd something seemed, it wouldn't be strange for Mag and Amy to be able to achieve it. How could she possibly have solved a 2-digit multiplication problem in such a short time? Besides, she didn't even make any calculations, she must have just blurted out a random answer. Ulton rose to his feet as he glowered at Mag with a cold expression, and interrogated, Do you think we're all idiots? This is indeed a contest of speed, but the correct answer has to be reached first. Everyone was still reeling from shock when they were enlightened by Ulton's words. Just as he had said, it was completely impossible to solve a 2-digit multiplication problem in half an hour, especially when 0 calculations had been made during this process. As such, the only possibility was that Amy was lying, and that she hadn't actually calculated the correct answer. Instead, she had merely blurted out a random number, and was trying to somehow swindle a victory. The smiles on the faces of the revolutionaries gradually congealed as they turned their eyes toward Amy and Mag. If that was indeed true, then their actions would bring disgrace to all of the revolutionaries present. In the decimal system, this is only to be expected. If Amy didn't have to waste time meticulously writing down that answer in the end, she would have been able to calculate the answer in her mind within 10 seconds. Mag's expression remained completely unflustered as he looked back at Ulton, and said, In any case, Amy has already confirmed her answer. If you have any doubts, you can wait until he's also got an answer, then ask him to convert it into decimal form for comparison. The entire hall fell silent once again. No one had expected Mag to give such a calm and straightforward response. Ultan's eyes were flashing with a hint of bewilderment as he looked at Mag. He could tell that Mag didn't seem to be lying, so how could he possibly be so confident? Byron stood up, and said, "Seeing as one side is expressing doubts regarding the answer, I suggest our two sides each task one more person with the same calculation. That way, we'll have more answers for confirmation." Ultan was about to issue another retort when Irma raised a hand to stop him, and nodded as he said, "We'll do as you say, Master Byron. Don't be so quick to jump to conclusions, Ultan. Fitch, you keep doing what you're doing. Leroy will be the one calculating the problem from my side, and his answer will be used as the final answer for cross-referencing and comparison." Ultan sat down with a dark expression before aiming a cold glare at Mag. "Lister will be responsible for calculation on our side, and his answer will also be our final answer." Byron nodded in response before turning to Lister. "Yes." Lister nodded before beginning his calculations. Leroy had also received a quill and a stack of paper. He hesitated momentarily before exchanging a glance with Irma, and then also set about making his calculations. "This is indeed becoming rather interesting." A smile appeared on Fitch's face as he turned around to continue his work as well. His quill was scribbling even more furiously over the sheet of paper, even to the extent that the tip of his quill was barely traceable to the naked eye. "Father, why don't they believe me?" Amy asked as she looked up at Mag with a perplexed look on her little face. "Because you're so much better than them that they're unable to comprehend it. If you want them to believe, then you have to shatter their outlook on the world and force them to embrace a new world. That's not an easy task," Mag replied in a quiet voice. Even though he had expected this dissent from the Conservatives, it was still a little disappointing for him to see them continue to be so stubborn and dogmatic. "If Father had competed instead of me, they'd be even more shocked." Amy nodded in response. "That's true." A smile appeared on Mag's face. With his eidetic memory, answers to normal multiplication questions were directly accessible in his mind, so he wouldn't even need to calculate at all. Thus, Fitch continued to calculate along with Lister and Leroy, and the atmosphere within the hall became quite tense once again. The outcome of this contest would determine the result of this debate, and, more importantly, whether the decimal system would receive widespread implementation. No one would have dreamed that this monumental task would fall on the shoulders of a little 4-year-old girl, and this startling turn of events had caught everyone off guard. Meanwhile, Mag was carrying Amy in his arms as he made a lap around the hall, appreciating the beautiful mosaics on the walls and telling Amy about the history of the Norland continent. Alex didn't actually know much about the church's history, but Mag could roughly glean the story through the introductory annotations on the wall mosaics. Even though these annotations had to be taken with a grain of salt due to the fact that they were naturally all praising the church as a glorious entity of righteousness, the story told still reflected a representation of the church that had survived through the Dark Ages. Faith was the best remedy for those suffering from despair amid the endless darkness. It was like an undying flame that was present in the heart of every human being, uniting them as one and making them so powerful a race that even the giant dragons had to be wary of them. The church's power was forcibly reduced before it could abuse that power. At least this way, the church's glorious image remains eternal in everyone's hearts. Mag looked at the wall mosaics with furrowed brows as he thought to himself, "It has to be said that Andrei really is a wise king. However, he's not even willing to tolerate the church. How can he tolerate his two sons doing so many heinous things behind his back?" "I've got an answer." Right at this moment, Fitch's words cut off Mag's train of thought, and he turned to face him with Amy in his arms. Everyone in the hall turned their attention to Fitch in unison with tense, expectant eyes. However, Fitch only had eyes for Amy as he calmly said, "I took the liberty of converting my answer into decimal form, and it's 896. I've lost." The entire hall erupted into a loud commotion following a brief silence. Everyone wore astonished expressions on their faces as they struggled to come to terms with what they were hearing. Fitch lost. That little girl had the right answer. The little girl only took half a minute to get her answer, but Fitch took over half an hour to get the same answer? How is that possible? None of the conservatives were willing to accept such a crushing loss. To think that the most prodigious young talent among them, Fitch, had lost to a little half-elf girl who was only 4 years old. Does that mean we won? That means that little girl calculated the right answer. She really calculated the correct answer to a 2-digit multiplication problem in half a minute. That's absolutely incredible. Long live the decimal system. Following a brief period of stunned silence, all of the revolutionaries erupted into ecstasy. Just a moment ago, they had been dwelling deep in the pits of despair, and this sudden massive contrast made for an amazing experience. Luna jumped up with excitement, but she quickly realized that what she was doing wasn't very ladylike, and a blush appeared on her face as she stood still on the spot again. Thankfully, everyone in the hall had their eyes fixed on Meg and Amy, so no one noticed her little slip-up. A smile had also appeared on Byron's face as he looked at Meg and Amy with approval in his eyes. As expected, inviting the inventor of the Mamie multiplication table to the debate was the best course of action. I'm surprised he was willing to concede his loss so easily. Meg was looking at Fitch with a hint of surprise as well as approval on his face. The vast majority of those so-called prodigies were extremely proud, yet this boy was able to set aside his ego and have the humility to openly admit his loss to a little 4-year-old girl in front of so many people. He was a true man. That's impossible. Alton abruptly rose to his feet as the confident expression on his face completely crumbled. His reputation and career were on the line. If Fitch lost, then it was over for him. Leroy. What did you get? You had to have gotten a different answer from that little rascal, right? Alton turned to Leroy with a hint of desperation in his eyes. Everyone else also turned to Leroy and Lister. Fitch had already conceded that Amy had given the correct answer. Now, it was time to compare Fitch's answer with the ones derived by these two to determine the final result of this impromptu contest. Leroy slowly put down the quill in his hand and looked at his final answer. He then turned to Alton with a complex expression, and said, Fitch's answer is correct. I also got the same answer as Fitch. At this moment, Lister also put down his quill and turned to Meg and Amy with awe and admiration in his eyes. How? How could this be? Alton stumbled and almost fell over. He rushed over to Leroy's table and grabbed the piece of paper the other man had been working on. After catching sight of his final answer, his legs finally gave out from under him as he sat heavily on the ground. All color had drained from his face. The entire hall fell deathly silent once again, and all of the conservatives wore ugly expressions. A man of Leroy's status clearly wouldn't lie in a situation like this. Otherwise, if it were to be proven later on that he had told a fib in this situation, his reputation would receive a lethal blow. All 4 people who had worked on this question had arrived at the same answer, so the result of this contest was nothing more than a foregone conclusion. Amy had derived the answer to the question in a scarcely believable time of half a minute, completely crushing the genius, Fitch, who was seen as the likeliest successor to Irma. Contestant Amy is the winner of this contest. The MC stepped forward and pointed a finger at Amy. We won. A collective cheer erupted from the revolutionaries. They had been on the back foot throughout the entirety of the past 10 debates, only to stage a miraculous comeback and clinch the victory in the 11th hour. It was all thanks to this extraordinary father and daughter duo. They had successfully turned the tables in one fell swoop, and given them the victory that they had been dreaming of. To think that she was able to calculate a 2-digit multiplication problem in half a minute, she's not just a prodigy anymore, she's a freak. Also, according to what Mr. Mag said, half a minute isn't her limit. If she hadn't used her quill, it would have taken even less time. That's incredible. Could it be that Mr. Mag even had a multiplication table for 2-digit numbers? If we learn it, will we be able to calculate such problems just as quickly? Aside from the loud cheers erupting through the revolutionaries, many of them were discussing spiritedly among themselves. The oppression they had suffered at the hands of the conservatives was making them begin to doubt whether it was worth supporting the decimal system and the multiplication table, after all. However, after witnessing Amy's downright terrifying calculation abilities, all of those doubts had been completely quelled. Now, their minds were only filled with admiration for Meg as well as anticipation for their own futures. The hexadecimal system was already well established in the current world of mathematics, so it would be very difficult for them to leave a last legacy. However, now that the brand new era of the decimal system was about to be ushered in, they were going to be regarded as the first group of people to champion such a revolution, making them pioneers of sorts. This monumental debate was most likely going to be recorded in the Roth Empire's history books. In particular, this final debate would surely be regarded as a major turning point in the history of mathematics when reviewed many years in the future. The one who had proposed the Mamie multiplication table, Mr. Mag, and his freakish prodigious daughter had definitely stamped their mark on history. Byron rose to his feet before turning to Irma and the others as he smiled, and said, "Seeing as the final result has been decided, I expect you to keep your promise. The conservatives can no longer impede the widespread implementation of the decimal system, and the Department of Education will be overseeing this implementation. I hope you won't do anything out of line. Rest assured, Master Byron, we made a promise and we fully intend to keep it." Irma slowly rose to his feet with a strained expression as he turned to Mag, and said, "However, I'm not sure if those scholars would be willing to learn and popularize the so-called multiplication table if they were to discover that it had been invented by a chef." Mag looked back at Irma with a deriding sneer, and countered, "Something as crude and inefficient as the hexadecimal system could have easily been invented by a cave-dwelling Neanderthal chef at some point in the distant past, yet you still revere it as a prized treasure, do you not? Even the text and language that we're now using evolved from the most crude cave carvings made by our primitive ancestors. Are you going to renounce this language just because you look down on those primal beings?" "Humph! What utter nonsense!" Irma's expression darkened as he stormed out of the hall. Leroy took a final meaningful glance at Mag before also departing. Meanwhile, two young scholars helped Ulton to his feet, and the trio hung their heads low as they scurried past Mag. "Hey, old man, I hope you remember what you promised everyone earlier. Make sure to publicly announce your retirement as soon as possible. I'm sure the entire Roth Empire would rejoice upon hearing such fantastic news." Mag stabbed another dagger into Ulton's heart with a benevolent smile that completely belied the venom in his words. "You?" Ulton's eyes widened before he fainted on the spot. Right at this moment, Fitch approached Mag, and asked, "Mr. Mag, right? Can I learn decimal form calculation from you?" All of the people who were making their way toward the entrance of the hall turned around to look at Fitch with incredulity in their eyes. Fitch had always been groomed as the successor to Irma, who was the most esteemed figure in the field of mathematics in the Roth Empire. With such a prestigious backer, Fitch had an immeasurable future, and he was destined to become the scintillating star among the world of scholars. But now, this young man was throwing that bright future away to learn about the decimal system from Mag? Mag and his daughter had just given the conservatives a vicious slap to the face, yet Fitch was immediately jumping ship and joining them. What he was doing was akin to ruining his own future career. Here in Rodu, if any scholar were to offend Irma, then they would never amount to anything, as they would be oppressed and ostracized until the day they died. Aside from surprise, there was also fury on the faces of the conservatives. This was an utter betrayal from Fitch, and they were struggling to come to terms with his decision. Even the revolutionaries were all looking at Fitch with puzzlement in their eyes. Even though the revolutionaries had won this debate due to a brilliant display from Mag and his daughter, the hexadecimal system had been in prevalent use within the human race for several decades, and it would undoubtedly take a long time for the decimal system to replace it. So why was Fitch abandoning all of his brilliant future prospects? Irma had just reached the entrance to the hall when he faltered in his footsteps upon hearing Fitch's words. He then harumphed coldly without even turning his back before storming away. His career as a scholar is over. All of the conservatives looked at Fitch with wistful expressions before also exiting the hall. Of course, there were also some who were taking pleasure in the misfortune that was sure to befall Fitch as a consequence of his actions. Mag looked at Fitch for a while before shaking his head as he replied, "Sorry, but I'm not taking students. If you want to learn decimal form calculation, then you can ask Master Byron. He's more professional than me, I'm just an illiterate chef." Fitch shook his head with a determined expression as he insisted, "No, I want to learn from you. I want to learn the method that she used to calculate the answer to a 2-digit multiplication problem in less than half a minute. I've never cared about my master's occupation or what kind of person they are. Regardless of who you are, knowledge remains constant, and that's what I want to learn from you." Mag looked into Fitch's pure and determined eyes for a while longer before shaking his head again. "I don't take students, and I'll be going back to Chaos City tomorrow. If you really want to learn the decimal system and the multiplication table, you can join the revolutionaries and send letters to me if you have any questions. Then it's settled." Fitch's eyes immediately lit up as he extended a respectful bow toward Mag. A smile appeared on Mag's face as he nodded in response. Fitch then made his way over to Byron and began to converse with him in a modest manner. Even from afar, it was quite apparent to Mag that Byron was in a very good mood. "Father, I did really well, didn't I?" Amy looked up at Mag with an expression that was practically screaming "Praise me." Mag nodded with a smile, and replied, "Yes, you did very well, little Amy. You're already better at mathematics than all of those old guys." Luna also made her way over to them, and gave Amy a thumbs up as she said, "That's right, you beat the #1 mathematics prodigy of Rodu today, little Amy, you did extremely well." Hee hee. Amy was filled with elation, having been praised by both Mag and Luna. She swayed Mag's arm from side to side and whispered into his ear, "Put me down, father, I'm going to go play hide and seek with Ugly Duckling. You can have some alone time with teacher Luna." Mag was at a loss for words as he gently placed Amy down onto the ground, wondering just what was going on in that little head of hers. Luna glanced at Fitch, then turned to Mag with a smile, and asked, "Fitch is an extremely talented individual, are you not going to consider taking him as your student?" Mag shook his head with a smile, and replied, "I'm a chef, not a teacher. If he was a cooking prodigy, perhaps I'd consider it." Luna couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Thank heavens you didn't say that when everyone else was around. Otherwise, you'd be making a lot more enemies than you already have." Mag's sharp tirade from earlier had completely changed the warm and gentle image that Luna had of him. However, she didn't find this revelation to be uncomfortable in the slightest. Instead, she felt as if she was getting to know him better. This was how a man should be: warm and benevolent to those who deserved it, yet sharp and unforgiving in equal measure to those who didn't. Mag and Luna chatted a bit about promotion of the decimal system before Mag suddenly discovered that he didn't know where Amy had run off to. He hurriedly apologized to Luna before excusing himself to hurry away in search of Amy. After a while, Amy was still nowhere to be found, and Mag was starting to panic a little. "There's a door here, could it be that Amy went into it?" Luna was also searching around in an urgent manner when she suddenly discovered a small door that was slightly ajar in a discreet corner of the hall. "I'll go have a look." Mag immediately hurried toward the door. This small door was just wide enough for Amy and Ugly Duckling to pass through, and they weren't anywhere else in the hall, so the likeliest possibility was that she had entered through this door while chasing Ugly Duckling. Exiting the hall through this small door, Mag was greeted by the sight of a block of buildings with a round dome. There were many evergreen trees growing in the area, and there was not a single person to be seen. It was a very peaceful and secluded place. "Amy! Amy!" Mag yelled as he looked around. There were too many buildings and trees here, and Amy would definitely panic if she were to get lost in this place. If something were to happen to her, he wouldn't be there to protect her, and that notion made him feel very uneasy. Don't worry, Mr. Mag, all of the church's priests are kind and gentle people. Little Amy is really smart as well, so nothing could happen to her here, Luna consoled in a comforting tone. Let's keep looking around. If we still can't find her, then I'll get my grandfather to speak with the personnel in the church so they can help us in our search. All right. Mag nodded before making his way in a certain direction. He looked around with rapt focus, and at the same time, he said internally, "System, give me Amy's location." "Apologies, but the system doesn't provide location services," the system replied before adopting a cheeky tone as it continued, "However, the system does offer a phone watch product. Are you worried that your children will go missing? Are you worried that you won't be able to find them? Well, fear not, because the My Little Genius phone watch will be the answer to all your concerns. No matter where you are, I can find you with just a phone call." "Hey! I can find you with just phone call, I can find you with just phone call." Mag's brows were tightly furrowed as the system began to play and jingle in his mind. Piss off! After searching for over 10 minutes and looking through every single corner of several halls, Mag was still unable to find Amy, and his expression was becoming more and more concerned. Luna also wore an urgent expression, and she was just about to say something as she approached Mag. Meow! Right at this moment, the mellow cry of a cat sounded from nearby. "It's Ugly Duckling!" Mag's gaze was immediately drawn to the grand hall to his right. The thick wooden door that was around 5 to 6 meters tall was tightly shut, but he was sure that he had heard Ugly Duckling's meow from in there. As such, he hurriedly strode forward and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The sight that greeted him within the hall immediately made him falter momentarily. The thick wooden door was slowly pushed open, revealing a cavernous hall that was slightly dim despite the lamps hanging from the walls. In the deepest part of the hall, there was an elderly man sitting on a throne with a crown on his head. He was holding a diamond-studded staff that was shimmering with glorious light, striking the onlooker with the urge to revere and pray to it. At the foot of a gem-studded staircase leading up to the throne, there was a small humanoid figure standing at the center of the hall. A beam of light shone down from the ceiling directly onto her body, and it was as if a shimmering golden veil had been draped over her. She was none other than Amy, but it was still a mystery to Mag how she had ended up here. "It's the Pope, he won't hurt Amy," Luna said in a quiet voice as she laid a hand on Mag's arm. Mag hesitated momentarily before withdrawing his outstretched foot. He looked up at the elderly man on the throne, who was sitting there in a stationary statuesque manner. His benevolent features made it impossible to develop any enmity toward him, and he was appraising Amy with a pair of light blue eyes that were gleaming like diamonds. What does he want to do? Mag was still feeling rather wary. The current Pope, Kant, had outlasted the 2 kings prior to Andrei. He witnessed the Church's fall from grace, but he continued to urge the Church to accept these changes without resistance, thereby indicating that he was very much a man of peace. However, Amy was far too important to Mag, so he couldn't help but feel wary of this benevolent old Pope. Amy extended a little hand with a curious look on her face, inspecting the golden light that was falling onto palm. A joyful smile appeared on her face as specks of golden light began to converge toward her back, manifesting into a pair of golden semi-transparent wings. She gently flapped those wings, and her feet left the ground as she rose up into the air. "Wow! I can fly now!" Amy was squealing with delight as she attempted to control the wings. Her body rose up higher and higher, and even though her ascent was a little unstable, she was most definitely flying. Meow! Ugly Duckling looked up at Amy with an urgent expression, flapping its front paws with all its might as if it were also trying to fly. This light, Mag looked on at the flying Amy with a hint of surprise on his face. There were some races in this world who were capable of flight such as vampires, but elves were definitely not on this list. Unless they could manifest wings with magic or use some magic tools to help them fly, there was no elf who could fly without using any magic. As such, The only possibility was that the beam of light shining down on Amy had granted her the ability of flight. Amy was adorable as ever as she rose up into the air. She was like a holy fairy who was full of sprightly energy, making it difficult for the onlooker to turn their gaze away from her. The one chosen by God. You really are the one chosen by God. I can't believe it. The Pope looked up at Amy, and his perpetually calm eyes were currently filled with excitement. Whoa! Amy flapped her little wings as she danced through the air in the hall. Only after a while did she notice that Mag and Luna were standing at the entrance to the hall, and she immediately yelled with elation, "Father, Teacher Luna, look! I can fly now!" Mag smiled as he gestured toward Amy, and urged, "Amy, get down from there." "All right," Amy replied obediently before flying toward Mag. However, she failed to control her speed during her descent, and plummeted straight down when she was still around 2 meters away from the ground. Thankfully, Mag was able to react in time to catch her in his arms. "Hee, I knew Father would catch me." An elated smile appeared on her face before she turned around to look at the old man sitting on the throne. Her smile widened even further as she said, "Grandpa Sparkles, thank you for giving me these wings. God chose you, not me. If you want to thank someone, then you should be expressing your gratitude toward God." The Pope smiled at Amy as he said, "Would you be willing to join our church to become our holy maiden? If you'd like, this crown will be yours, and you'll become the owner of this entire church." Luna's mouth slowly gaped open as she looked on with incredulity. The Pope was asking Amy to become the holy maiden and take over the church? That was insane. Mag was also completely stunned by this turn of events. Amy had merely played a game of hide-and-seek, yet she had been chosen by the Pope to become the Holy Maiden. Did that mean she was going to become the next Pope? Even for a man who possessed a vast array of experiences like Mag, this notion was quite difficult to digest. Even though the church wasn't as powerful as it once had been, it was still very influential within the upper echelons of the Roth Empire. Even when Andrei was being inaugurated, he had to kneel down and kiss the back of the Pope's hand. Only after the Pope placed the crown on his head did he officially become the king. However, the Pope was now offering such a prestigious position to Amy without even a second thought. Mag felt as if he were dreaming as he gawked at the old man seated on the throne. Before Mag had a chance to ponder the issue any further, Amy shook her head with a serious expression, and said, "Sorry, Grandpa Sparkles, but I don't like to sit so high up, and this church is too big for me, so I'll have to refuse. I want to live with Father in his restaurant and eat all types of delicious foods every day." Amy had turned down such a brilliant opportunity in preference for delicious food. In her heart, the position of Pope couldn't even compare to a bowl of tofu pudding. Thankfully, there weren't any other people around. Otherwise, Mag would have to be wary of jealous reactions from passers-by. The Pope also faltered slightly upon hearing this, clearly not expecting his offer to be declined, particularly not for such an absurd reason. He appraised the serious expression on Amy's face with a warm smile, and said, "If you become the Pope, you'll be entitled to many rights. No one on the Norland continent will be able to hurt those you want to protect, and of course, you'll get to eat whatever you want. But I only want to eat Father's cooking, and I only want to live with Father and no one else." Amy shook her head as she said, "Also, I'm super strong right now, so I'll definitely be able to protect Father in the future." If Amy's words were to be heard by the rest of the world, they would definitely create a massive stir. After all, there was most likely no other person in this world who would refuse an offer to become the Pope for such a reason. This was downright insane. The Pope appraised Amy with wise eyes that were filled with praise and appreciation, not displeased in the slightest by Amy's rejection. "Even if you don't become our holy maiden, you're destined for great things, and you'll definitely be able to protect your father." The Pope appraised Amy with a smile and paused for a moment before continuing, "However, if you do become the Pope, you can protect all kind humans." "All kind humans?" A thoughtful look appeared on Amy's face. She contemplated the Pope's words for a while before looking up as she asked, "But did you protect them?" The Pope's smile gradually faded, and a hint of sorrow appeared in his eyes. Since when did she start asking such sharp questions? Mag turned to Amy with surprise and approval in his eyes. Being able to see through empty promises and identifying the crux of the matter was undoubtedly a very good ability to have. However, Mag then turned to the Pope with a wary look in his eyes. Even though the Pope was renowned for being a benevolent man of peace and hadn't displayed any animosity this entire time, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't be infuriated by Amy's question. The Church clearly didn't possess the ability to protect anyone anymore. What they had to worry about now was how they were going to protect this final Carlo Church. Luna also wore a concerned look on her face. Even though the Church's powers had waned significantly, she had heard many stories about the Church from her grandfather. Even her grandfather had to extend a respectful bow every time he saw the Pope, and he was a man who was greatly respected by many. The Pope was silent for a while before replying in a heavy voice, "I once worked hard to try and protect them, until one day, I discovered that what I was doing was only hurting them more instead. Hence, I chose to become a bystander, and prohibited the Church from interfering with the lives of the masses. If your help is only hurting them, then you must have not found the right way to help them. You're not wrong for trying to help them, but you should change your methods instead of trying to run away," Amy said as she furrowed her brows in a sympathetic manner. "If those kind people pray for your help, but you choose to ignore them, isn't that very cruel?" The Pope's eyes gradually lit up, and he reflexively rose to his feet. He raised his head slightly to look up at the golden light shining down from the heavens, and new life seemed to have been injected into his body. "Did I say something wrong, Father?" Amy whispered into Mag's ear. Mag shook his head with a smile, and replied, "No, that was very well spoken, Amy." No one else would be able to say such things to the Pope if they stood in Amy's place. The Pope withdrew his gaze from the round dome ceiling up above, then turned to Amy with a benevolent expression, and asked, "What's your name, little girl?" "Amy," Amy replied in a crisp voice. "Amy, regardless of whether you want to accept my offer, the position of Holy Maiden will forever be reserved for you. If you'd like to join our church one day, I will inaugurate you as the Pope in person." The Pope cast his gaze out of the hall, and even though he was smiling, there was a sharp look in his eyes as he mused, "As for myself, it's about time I taught the church to do what it should be doing." Amy twisted around to look at the pair of little golden wings on her back with a conflicted look, and asked, "Then what about these wings? If I refuse, will I have to return them to you?" She was absolutely in love with the feeling of flying without having to expend any magical power, and she was quite reluctant to give up these wings. The Pope shook his head with a smile, and replied, "Those wings are a blessing from God, so only God can take them away. You are the one chosen by God, and God never makes the wrong decision." An elated smile appeared on Amy's face as she said, "Wow, then you have to thank God for me. I really like these wings." The Pope nodded with a smile before taking a seat again. Mag and Luna extended respectful bows toward the Pope before carrying Amy and Ugly Duckling out of the hall. The thick and heavy wooden doors slowly closed behind them, and the intricate designs carved onto the door struck the beholder with a sense of awe and prestige. Amy spread open her little wings and flew up from Mag's arms, weaving through the trees in an agile manner. Her twin silver braids bobbed up and down during her flight, and the peals of tinkling laughter escaping from her mouth reverberated throughout the entire church. Many priests had gathered at the windows to see what was going on outside, and they were all astonished by the sight of the little golden wings on Amy's back. Some of the older priests were practically glowing with excitement as they joined their hands in reverent prayer. Meow! Ugly Duckling galloped along the ground as quickly as it could, trying to keep up with Amy. Amy suddenly stopped in midair and turned to Ugly Duckling with a sweet smile as she asked, "Ugly Duckling, do you want to fly as well?" Meow! Ugly Duckling was quite alarmed by this notion, and its paw slipped as it plunged headfirst into a pile of dead leaves. Its entire head was concealed under a layer of leaves, and it maintained that position like an ostrich with its head in the sand. "That's not going to work." The angelic voice of a demon sounded beside its ear. An ugly duckling buried its head even deeper into the leaves, only to be plucked out by Amy. Amy held Ugly Duckling by the scruff of its neck and looked into its eyes with a serious expression. "Even though you're an ugly duckling now, you have to remember that you're going to become a beautiful white swan one day. If you're scared of heights, how will you ever become a swan?" Meow. Ugly Duckling blinked with tears shimmering in its large blue eyes as if it were a frightened child. "You can do it." Amy patted Ugly Duckling's head before flapping her wings, and she instantly rose up into the air. Meow. Howl. Ugly Duckling was so frightened that it was howling like a husky, and Mag was feeling quite sympathetic toward it, but also a little amused. Could it be that both Ugly Duckling and Ozzy are part husky? After allowing Amy to play with her new wings for a while, Mag gestured for her to come down, seeing as more and more priests were being drawn to the scene by her wings. "Come on down, little Amy, it's time for us to go." Amy carried Ugly Duckling down from above, and the latter had its eyes tightly shut. She descended right into Mag's arms, and the joyful smile on her face created a stark contrast with Ugly Duckling's expression of horror and despair. "Howl! Meow!" Ugly Duckling cried pitiably as it turned to Amy. "Not bad, Ugly Duckling. I'll take you flying every day from now on." Amy smiled as she patted Ugly Duckling's head. "Meow!" Ugly Duckling's eyes rolled over and it fainted in Amy's arms.